In the opening scene, Frieren, the Downer, is seen reading a grimoire while riding back to the royal capital with her 3 friends, Himmel, Hyder, and Eisen, after finally taking down the Demon King they've been hunting for a decade. As they spot the capital's walls coming into view, Himmel and the others call out to Frieren to check out the beautiful walls and talk about what's next, since they're all retiring now. Frieren, who feels like no time has passed, brushes off the walls and just chats with her buddies, who are pretty nervous about what life has in store. By the end of their talk, they're all laughing and joking like real friends do. Before long, they reach the royal capital and get the hero treatment from the whole city. Soon after, they meet the king, who thanks them personally for defeating the Demon King and bringing peace to their kingdom. Afterward, the heroes kick back until night to join the festival thrown in their honor. Once it gets dark, Himmel and Eisen take their time indulging in the city's treats, while Hyder, who was a priest back then, drinks way too much. Himmel spots Frieren sulking and tells her to lighten up and be happy since the king is setting up statues of them in the plaza. Frieren ignores him and keeps waiting for the party to wrap up. About an hour later, the heroes all gather to watch the sky and say their final goodbyes. After reminiscing about some embarrassing and amazing moments from the past 10 years, including some dumb moves Frieren made during their adventures, everyone except Frieren bursts into laughter. When the noise dies down, Himmel thanks everyone for making the last 10 years a blast. Frieren, being a buzzkill, chimes in that it was just 10 years, so it's not a big deal. Knowing how spoiled and rude Frieren can be, Himmel brushes her off and turns with his friends to witness the Era meteor shower, which is a once-in-a-lifetime event that happens only every 50 years. As they soak in the spectacular sight, Frieren kills the vibe again by saying the view from the city kinda sucks. To help him out, she promises to take him to a better spot in 50 years to catch a clearer view of the meteors if he's still kicking by then. Himmel nods along and continues watching. The next morning, Frieren heads out from the royal capital to keep exploring the edges of the continent for spells and other stuff. Even though Himmel and the other two still don't get how she sees time, they wish her well. Days turn into weeks, months, and years as Frieren continues her journey. Over the years, she gathers so much knowledge and experience that she finally decides it's time to chill for a bit. After 50 years of wandering and collecting spells, she takes a break. One day, Frieren pops into a local antiques and magic shop to buy a shadow dragon's horn. Sadly, they don't have it in stock. She suddenly remembers one they snagged from the Demon King's castle way back and realizes she had Himmel hang on to it. With the meteor shower coming in a few weeks, Frieren recalls her promise to Himmel and decides it's time to keep it. After being on the road for nearly a month, Frieren finally rolls into the city. As she wanders through the streets, she notices all the changes that have been made. After searching high and low for Himmel, she finally spots him. Unfortunately, the Himmel she finds looks nothing like she expected. After 50 years away from the city, he's really aged and looks pretty frail. Without wasting time, Frieren asks about the horn she came for, and Himmel casually mentions it's been sitting in his cabinet all along. She scolds him for hiding something so dangerous, but Himmel just shrugs it off. He grabs the horn and hands it to Frieren, who doesn't seem too impressed. Once she's got the horn, Frieren sends it back to her place using her magic bird, and takes some time to check out the statues they made of them back in the day. After soaking in the sights, she goes back in and convinces Himmel to pack up so they can catch the legendary meteor shower one last time. They hit the road and run into Eisen the dwarf and Hyder, now a full-blown bishop, waiting by the city gates. After a warm welcome, Frieren leads them on a week-long trek to the spot she promised to take them all 50 years ago. Along the way, they relive their glory days with all sorts of adventures. When they finally get there, they lie back on the soft grass and watch the meteor shower together. Himmel thanks Frieren for keeping her promise and helping him enjoy life with his friends one last time before he passes away. And a few months later, Himmel finally succumbs to old age. At his funeral, Frieren stands with Eisen and Hyder, watching the procession. As the townspeople pay their respects to the hero, they notice how blank Frieren's expression is and call her a fake. When it's time to lay the good guy to rest, Frieren finally breaks down, realizing how foolish she's been for not really getting to know Himmel before he died. An hour after the burial, Hyder jumps into a carriage to head back to the holy city. Before he leaves, he says goodbye to Frieren, as if he knows it's the last time he'll see her, and tells her to bring him a drink at his grave whenever she visits. Frieren asks if he's scared of death, and the priest says he's not worried since they'll all be together in heaven. Shortly after he leaves, Frieren turns to the dwarf and tries to recruit him as her bodyguard. But Eisen is getting old too, and tells her he's not available for that job anymore. Frieren feels a bit sad, but eventually gives Eisen a smile for being such a good friend. Once everything is wrapped up, she sets off for her next adventure. 20 years later, Frieren checks out the outskirts of the holy city to catch up with Hyder. After getting lost in the woods for what feels like the 100th time, she finally stumbles upon a little girl with purple hair. The girl seems friendly and asks what Frieren's doing in the forest. Frieren mentions she's looking for a man named Hyder, and the purple-haired girl leads her to Hyder's cabin. There, Frieren finds her old buddy, now sporting a mane of gray hair, and they joke around for for a bit before settling down for some tea. When things get serious, Hader introduces the girl as Fern, a war orphan he took in a while ago. When he asks why she's visiting, Frieren says it's to repay her debts to him before he passes away. Hader scoffs at that and asks her for a favor. When Frieren agrees, he asks her to take Fern on as an apprentice, since she's pretty talented with magic. Frieren flat out declines because she worries Fern might get stronger only to die later. Not backing down, Hader asks for another favor, this time taking her to his library and showing her an encrypted grimoire from Ewig the Sage. He wants her to help translate it because it supposedly has forgotten spells for immortality and bringing people back to life, and rolls her eyes at how cheesy it is. When she finally gets her head around it, she asks Hader why he wants the grimoire studied if he's not afraid of dying. Hader admits he was just putting on a brave face and, actually, he is scared of death. Frieren gives him a hard time and tells him to give her 5 or 6 years to decode the whole thing. While she's at it, Hader asks her to teach Fern some magic too. So, Frieren heads back into the woods and spots Fern at the edge of a cliff, focused on a big boulder across the mountain. Frieren notices how well the little girl manages her mana and sees a ton of potential in her. Fern shows off her skills by firing a magic beam at the rock, but it misses. A bit puzzled, she asks Frieren what she needs to do to get stronger. Frieren kicks things off by asking if Fern really loves magic. When Fern says yes, Frieren smiles and starts her magic lessons. For her first lesson, Frieren sits by the riverside with Fern and breaks down magic control and mana strength. She tells Fern that she has a long way to go before she can increase the mana in her body. When Frieren sees the despair on Fern's face, she reassures her that her magic control is impressive for her age, and Fern acknowledges the compliment and keeps moving forward. Over the next few years, Frieren works on decoding the Ewig grimoire while teaching Fern to level up her magic. Fern practices day and night, hoping to build up enough strength and mana reserves to finally complete her mission. One day, Hader, now old and wobbly, finds Frieren in the library working on the grimoire. He asks about Fern's progress. Frieren tells him that while Fern is putting in the effort, she still has a long way to go before she becomes a real mage. As they chat, Hader collapses and wakes up hours later in bed. Unfazed, Frieren plans to work faster on the grimoire so she can help him her way. First, she seeks out Fern to tell her to pause her training and spend time with Hader during his final moments. When Frieren reaches the usual cliff, she finds Fern working hard to hit a rock and tells her to stop so she can be there for her master. But Fern gets upset and shares how she met Hader. She had just lost her entire village and family, being the only survivor. Hader found her when she was about to jump off a cliff to end her life. Thankfully, his words saved her. Now that she has a chance to repay him, Fern wants to honor Hader's name before he passes, whether by becoming a mage or learning another skill. After hearing her out, Frieren lets her do what she wants and continues deciphering the grimoire over the next few weeks. Fern keeps practicing until she feels ready to try again. Then one day, Frieren finally finishes translating the whole grimoire. Turns out, there's no immortality or resurrection spell, and Hader kind of knew that already. Instead of freaking out, he keeps his cool and hopes for a quick death. Hours before he passes away, Hader asks Frieren how Fern is doing. Frieren tells him that Fern is doing pretty well, and Hader urges her to take Fern as her new apprentice now that she's strong enough to fight by her side. At this point, Frieren feels obligated since it's her old friend's dying wish. Before she leaves, Hader asks Frieren to grab her payment from a drawer in the house and to leave before night falls because he fears he might die that day. Frieren tells Hader to give Fern a proper goodbye so she doesn't feel abandoned. Hader is impressed by her kindness and calls her a sweet girl. Frieren asks Hader why he saved Fern in the first place. He thinks it over for a bit and finally says it's because that's what Himmel would have done. So, Frieren heads over to the cliff and sees that Fern has already wrapped up her task. Soon after, she pays a visit to Hader's grave and pours out 2 bottles of booze in his honor. After witnessing the funeral rites, she leaves with her new apprentice, Fern. In the next scene, Fern and her master, Frieren, lend a hand to an old farmer to harvest pumpkins using magic and snag a scroll with folk magic tips for warming tea. Fern notices the odd way they're getting paid and asks Frieren why she doesn't just take cash. Frieren explains it's her passion. She feels it keeps her grounded. When they swing by town next, they bump into a herbalist who takes them into the woods to show them the sorry state of the hero Himmel's statue. The woman remembers Himmel fondly since he saved her when she was young and a demon was wreaking havoc on their village. She feels bad about Himmel having his image wrecked. Frieren chimes in that he kind of deserved it because he made sculpting a pain. The woman gets a bit weirded out by Frieren's comment, but lets the elven mage clean up the statue. After they finish cleaning, she looks at the dull grass around the statue and wishes it was a bit more colorful. Since Frieren has spells that can grow flowers, she decides to jazz up the area with some pretty blooms. She picks blue moonweed flowers, a type she hasn't seen before. Fern asks why she'd choose those, and Frieren explains it's because they grow in Himmel's town. To create the flowers, Frieren needs to check out a picture to have a mental reference. After seeing what it looks like, Frieren decides they need to go hunting for them so she can replicate eradicate the flowers. She calls for Fern to get ready, but then Fern is caught hiding some seed rats from her. After a little chat, they let the rats go in the forest and talk about how to find and analyze the blue moon flowers so they can cast spells to recreate them. Fern is all in, so they hit the road and chase down every lead they have to find the blue moon weed flowers. After exploring a bunch of options in nearby villages for 6 months and coming up empty, they decide to shake things up. This time, they head back to the herbalist to discuss a few more things. The herbalist is stoked about how long they've been searching, but Frieren thinks it didn't take that long at all. When the herbalist asks Fern about their progress, she just says no and complains about Frieren's crazy obsession with magic. The herbalist chuckles, pulls out a small pouch, and hands it to Fern while encouraging her to share her grievances with Frieren. In the next scene, Fern opens up to the smiling herbalist, showing her the small pouch of medicinal flowers the herbalist wanted them to plant instead. While they're chatting, a seed rat nabs their pouch of seeds and bolts into the woods. Frieren and Fern carefully follow the seed rat, putting their chat on hold until they finally find its stash. Along the way, Frieren asks Fern about her weird obsession again, and Fern admits it's because she loves magic. After reminiscing, Frieren and Fern figure out where the seed rats hide their treasure over time. When they reach the tower's base, they find petals from a familiar blue flower. Frieren then levitates to the top of the tower and finally spots a wild patch of blue moon weed flowers. Remembering Himmel's words about how beautiful the flowers were, she can't help but feel thrilled to see them. Fern shows up, firing off more silly questions to figure out why Frieren loves magic so much. Eventually, Frieren gives her some scenarios until she gets it. A few days later, they return to the statue and plant the weed flowers around it, with the herbalist tagging along. After some more light talk, Frieren places a flower crown on Himmel's head and wishes her buddy a peaceful and well-deserved afterlife. A couple of months later, Frieren and her apprentice set off to another town to look for spells. When they get there, Fern chats with her master about splitting bills and picking up the essentials they need to get by. As they list the must-haves, Fern suddenly remembers all the junk her master has blown their hard-earned cash on in the past, with the only worthwhile buy being a book on magical history and stuff. They hit an intersection where Frieren heads off to grab her stuff while Fern, worried about her wasting money again, tails her around town until they end up at an accessory shop, looking a bit lost. Fern ducks behind a fountain and catches a weird expression on her master's face. Right then, a stray cat rolls up to say hi. After some cat petting, Fern looks back up and sees her master paying for whatever's in the small box she's holding. Still staying hidden, Fern follows her master into the rougher part of town and watches her asking a local about a shop that sells good sweets and desserts. To her surprise, Fern follows Frieren to the tavern the guy pointed out, and isn't too shocked to see some smokers and wild characters checking out her master's lovely figure. Frieren casually asks those guys for dessert spots, and they surprisingly turn out to be nicer than they look. After giving her the scoop on a popular dessert place, the dudes walk her out. Fern keeps trailing her master until she remembers she still has shopping to do. Later that evening, Fern gets to the inn and finds Frieren already there. She says sorry for being late and settles in quickly. Not long after, Frieren invites her out on a dessert date, and Fern agrees, though a bit reluctantly. Once they hit the outdoor dessert shop, they take in the stunning view, and Frieren tells Fern to pick whatever she wants since she's been saving up for this. Fern mentions Frieren's fave dessert, Merker pudding, which sparks a memory of when they were kids hanging out with the guys. Back then, Frieren was kinda bummed she didn't know about their favorite foods, so they filled her in. Moving on, Frieren pulls out that box from earlier and hands it to Fern, who suddenly remembers it's her birthday. Fern opens the box to find a gorgeous hair ornament and thanks Frieren in her own way for the gift and for trying to get to know her better. The next day, both Frieren and Fern wake up, ready to hit the road for their next adventure. While they're walking, Fern asks her master what to expect this time, and Frieren says she wants to relive the adventures she had with Himmel and the others, so none of it fades away. Hearing that, Fern grins. It's the first time Frieren said something that made sense to her. She teases her master for a bit before going quiet and focusing on their journey. When they find an old piece of land, Frieren decides to teach Fern some defensive magic. After checking out her combat skills, Frieren ups the challenge and pulls off a 360 attack on her. Though Fern totally eats dirt in training, she still picks up some valuable lessons from her master. After a long day of training, the duo continued on their journey. As they traveled to their next stop, they chatted about defensive magic and the best ways to use it. While Fern was talking about magic, Frieren realized she hadn't read up on magical history. She teased her student for being slow with her studies. Fern took the jab in stride and kept moving alongside her master. Eventually, they reached the next village, where Frieren ran into someone she recognized, who led her to the spot where the Elder Sage of Corruption, Qual, was sealed. Just to give you some backstory, Qual is a demon who caused chaos in the area 80 years ago before being sealed away by the hero Himmel and his crew. Frieren knew the seal would have weakened over the years, so she was there to finally take care of the demon for good. As they made their way, the old guy told Frieren that Himmel used to visit the village every year until he stopped coming about 30 years ago just to check on how the seal was doing. Every time he dropped by, he'd call Frieren a bad person for not visiting him at all. Thankfully, Frieren hadn't forgotten about the seal, and now she was ready to keep her promise and destroy the monster once and for all. When they finally got to the seal, Frieren could feel it was definitely unstable. So, she decided to chill for the night and come back the next day to take on Qual. That evening, Fern asked her master why she chose to seal Qual instead of just destroying him back then. Frieren explained it was because he was way too strong for them to handle. Even as a demon, Qual was feared by humans as one powerful magician. The hundreds of spells he created back in the day are still in use today, and they really owe him for that. After throwing out some wild numbers to show how strong the demon really was, Fern got worried and asked her master if she could really fight such an enemy. Frieren just stood up and asked if she had really read the magic book. At this point, Fern gulped and admitted she hadn't. To save energy on small talk, Frieren lay down to sleep and prepare for the big day. The next day, Frieren and Fern approached the demon seal, armed and ready for battle. When it was time, Frieren broke the seal and brought the demon back to life. In those first moments, Qual reminisced about the good old days with Frieren and asked about the Demon King. When he found out Frieren had taken out his king, Qual got angry and decided he was going to seek revenge. He reached out and cast the only destructive spell he knew, Zoltrak. But to his shock, Fern's defense successfully blocked the attack. While he wondered how Fern could block his strongest spell, Frieren explained that humans had studied his magic for decades and developed new spells to counter it. Now, Zoltrak was just a regular offensive spell that posed no threat to any mage anymore. Realizing this, Qual figured that the defense spell must use up a ton of magic energy. All he needed to do was amp up his attacks and wear them out. On his next strike, Frieren told Fern to remember her practice and to guard her while she did something on the side. For the next few minutes, Qual focused all his attacks on Fern, who blocked every single one of them. What he didn't notice was that Frieren was already preparing a little surprise for him. By the time he caught on, it was too late. She unleashed a powerful attack spell and used it to take him down. Qual was immediately sent back to being a demon of the past, and Frieren returned to the village to share the news. There, she spotted a weird hat and recognized the old guy as the brat who had flipped her skirt up years ago. Time flies, she chuckled, smiling at the funny way humans live their lives. After collecting their reward, she and Fern set off to the next town, chatting like old pals and soaking in the sights along the way. About a year later, Frieren and Fern swung by the Graz Channel in the Central Lands to do some work and gather folk magic before hitting the road again. After a few days of exploring the area, they finally got to chat with an old man who took them to the beach, which was all polluted, and asked for their help to clean it up. In return, he offered them a fake book that he claimed was written by Flam, the legendary mage. Frieren checked out the book and asked the guy if that was the only grimoire in their village. When he said yes, she decided to lend a hand and help him clean the beach anyway. Fern was curious why she took the job, and Frieren said it was because she wanted to do it for herself. With that, they got to work. A few months later, during the chilly winter, Fern was seen heading out one morning to grab some food at the nearby store. When she came back to their inn room, she was totally grossed out by how messy it was. Turns out, she had cleaned it up the day before, but somehow Frieren had managed to wreck the place again before crashing for the night. Annoyed by Frieren's laziness, Fern snatched the book from Frieren's face and forced her to wake up. After getting her dressed, Fern pushed her master to the beach to keep working. After hitting a milestone, Fern asked Frieren if she'd always been this late and annoying. Frieren apologized for her tardiness and admitted she had never been a morning person. Once Fern heard that, she asked if Frieren had ever gotten in trouble because of it, and Frieren mentioned one time she had. They then kept packing the wood into a pile. When they wrapped it up, they burned it and cozied down for dinner that night. Their employer asked about their progress, and Frieren mentioned they were almost done. The man politely asked them to speed things up so they could finish before New Year's festival to catch the sunrise on day. Frieren just ignored him and kept eating. The next morning while working, Fern asked Frieren if she had ever seen a sunrise. Frieren replied that she never really cared for sunrises or whatever. To dodge more questions, Frieren hurried her work so they could finish up quickly. Over the following weeks, they pushed themselves to get as much done as possible to clear the debris before New Year. After several tiring hours tossing and burning debris, they finally wrapped up the job. Then, on New Year's Eve, they checked the water quality until they confirmed they were done. The man visited them that evening and made Frieren promise to be there for the sunrise the next day. On their way back to the inn, Fern asked how Frieren was going to wake up so early, and Frieren joked she'd just stay up all night and crash right after seeing the sunrise. That night, Frieren took a stroll down memory lane, remembering times she had with her friends when they were younger. Bright and early the next morning, Fern woke up to find Frieren still snoozing. Before the sun rose, she dragged her master to the popular viewing spot and made her stand by the railings to catch the sunrise. Thankfully, the sun painted a stunning yellowish-red glow across the sea and the town, but Frieren got bored pretty quickly and asked Fern to take her back home. However, Fern noticed that Frieren seemed to be enjoying herself a bit since she'd been grinning ear to ear since they arrived. Realizing Fern was right, Frieren decided to stick around a bit longer. Soon after, she remembered another time with her friends when they visited the graves of Isen's family. At the cemetery, Heider, the priest, bent down to pray for the souls of the fallen, wishing them a safe journey to heaven. Back then, Isen didn't believe in heaven, so he challenged the idea of such a fictional place. Luckily, the priest managed to convince both Isen and Himmel to accept the comfort that comes with believing in heaven. Almost 30 years later, Frieren shows up at the same spot with her apprentice and spots an old, squirmy Isen praying for the same folks again. She grinds to a halt when she sees the dwarf and asks if they can hang out. Even though he's a bit miffed by her lack of manners, Aizen still lets Frieren and her apprentice crash at his place. While sipping tea, Frieren asks Aizen what he needs so she can help him out. Aizen tells her he's been writing to Hyder over the years, so he knows Frieren asked for the same thing long before Hyder kicked the bucket. Frieren acts all surprised, and Aizen points out she didn't know this because she didn't bother to learn more about them at all. After some chit-chat, Aizen takes Frieren to Volbasin, a place she's been to ages ago. When they arrive, Frieren asks why he brought her there, and Aizen says it's to help him track down the real grimoire of the legendary mage Flam. Frieren shoots him a few questions, and soon it clicks that Hyder's been making steady headway in his search for the real deal. They wander into a large forest thick with plants, where the Viking dwarf tells them to look for a big tree. After tossing around a few silly comments, they finally get serious about finding the tree. This time, Frieren takes Fern's feelings into account and pushes Aizen to hurry up so Fern doesn't get too annoyed with her, which makes Aizen crack a smile. A few weeks into their search for the big tree, they finally start making some headway. As they chase down a lead, Frieren asks Aizen why he's so dead set on finding the grimoire, and Aizen says it's because he feels for her. When she asks him to explain, Aizen remembers how sad she was at Himmel's funeral, wishing she'd gotten to know him better. So, to help her connect with Himmel's spirit, he's planning to dig up notes from Flam to figure out how to chat with the dead, since Flam had written out the process. Frieren tells Aizen she doesn't care about seeing Himmel anymore, plus that kind of stuff is just fairy tales. Aizen chuckles and reminds her that all magic spells started out as fairy tales too, so there's nothing to stress about. He's already talked things over with Hyder, and they came up with this plan together. Right now, the best she can do is stick to the plan. When they reach the big tree, Frieren walks up and remembers when Flam planted it. That was 1,000 years ago, back when Frieren was still basically a teenager. On that day, Flam planted the tree to keep her house safe and hide her book of knowledge from nosy people. Before she took off, she told Frieren that someday she'd want to come back and grab the book. Now that she's here, Frieren uses her magic to lift the shield so she can get into the room behind the big tree. Fern is a bit surprised by how comfortable Frieren seems in this spot, but when Aizen tells her that Frieren was Flam's student, she keeps quiet. Checking the book, she finds a place Flam called Oriole, which is way up north on the continent. Flam said she talked to the souls of several dead buddies and wished Frieren could see it too. Fern gets curious about the place and asks her to find out where it is. Frieren looks it up and realizes it's in Ende, the same place where the Demon King's castle is. At first, Frieren is hesitant about going there, but Aizen convinces her to promise to visit so she can chat with Himmel. With everything set, Frieren and Aizen head out to the Demon King's castle. On the way, Frieren dozes off and starts mumbling about how cold the north is. Fern gets worried and asks Aizen what happened to make Frieren so anxious. Aizen explains that the northern part of the continent is still freezing cold, so they need to be ready. Fern stays quiet and keeps going until she gets annoyed with Frieren's laziness. Aizen eventually asks her what she thinks about Frieren as a master, and Fern shares all the odd stuff she's seen during her journey with Frieren. In the end, she calls Frieren a weirdo who doesn't seem to enjoy much. Hearing Fern's take on Frieren, Aizen remembers their first meteor shower together. Before Hyder interrupted the sad vibe, Himmel and Aizen were trying to convince Frieren to take on a student so she wouldn't get bored traveling. Eventually, Aizen figures Frieren must be a good master before they get back to his place to chill. After saying goodbye to the old dwarf, Aizen wishes Frieren luck on her long journey ahead. Frieren pauses to think about the last time she visited a place like this. Once she's done, she turns to Fern and says their journey will only take about 10 years. As master and apprentice set off on their journey, Fern takes a moment to remember the last time she had a long chat with Hyder before he passed away. Back then, Hyder was trying to trick Fern into behaving under Free's guidance, threatening to haunt her if she didn't. When Fern figured out his tricks, she hit back and made the old guy laugh. But as that nice memory starts to fade away, Fern wakes up, sleeping on Frieren's shoulder. Once Frieren sees her apprentice is awake, she tells her to stay alert because they're about to arrive at their next destination, the Willy region in the Central Lands. Fern does what she needs to, and soon, they reach a town to relax a bit. A few minutes later, they stop at a store to grab supplies. There, the woman running the place warns them about creepy ghosts hanging around the mountain pass they need to cross after leaving town. Frieren gets curious and asks more about the ghosts, thinking they might just be some undead monsters. The woman suggests they talk to the locals for more info. Before heading back to the inn, Frieren chats with people around town to learn about the ghosts lurking in the mountain pass. From what they gather, those ghosts are actually the spirits of loved ones trying to reconnect with their living relatives. When they get to the inn, Frieren explains how the undead work, telling Fern that they're just corpses controlled by magic and all that. But this time, these ghosts don't look like typical undead. As they enter their room, Frieren seems a bit freaked out about how the monster might look, and tells Fern to forget about trying to figure it out. Before bed, Frieren makes plans for them to leave the village the next day, but Fern convinces her to stay and help out. The next morning, they head to the mountain pass to check out the ghost sightings. Once they reach the area where villagers are disappearing, Fern goes on high alert and warns her master about the illusions monsters use to trap people. Frieren recognizes a specific monster known for using such magic, and calls it by name Einsam. Now Einsam is a greedy and clever monster that feeds on humans. It does this by conjuring up phantoms that resemble the dead relatives of its victims to lure them into its lair to devour them. Luckily, the monster isn't a big problem for mages, since high mana spells can take them out. Frieren asks Fern if she can really shoot down an apparition of someone like Hyder without feeling guilty afterward. Fern tells her not to worry about her, and they keep moving. Eventually, the atmosphere turns foggy and dark. Fern and her master arm themselves, ready to take on any phantoms that might show up. Just moments later, Hyder appears behind Fern, calling her name. Fern turns to see Hyder's apparition, but just as she's about to shoot it, Hyder speaks only sweet words from a cherished memory Fern has of him. She freezes up, caught in the moment. Frieren realizes what's happening and prepares to take Hyder out herself. Just as she's about to act, Himmel pops up as well. Not bothered by the creepy apparition, Frieren tells Himmel to say what he needs to say, and Himmel tells her to shoot him. So Frieren does just that without a second thought, which nudges Fern to do the same. Once they're done shooting, Fern breaks down a bit as she returns to reality. Frieren tells her to stay calm so she can face the real Hyder when they reach Oriole. With that, Fern gets back to herself and continues to follow her master. After a few more hours on the road, the duo finally made it to Regal Canyon, out in the Central Lands. They hide out of sight when they spot a red fire dragon snoozing in its nest. Frieren checks out the pile of junk the crazed dragon lifted from past adventurers, but then she spots a grimoire and gets super interested in snatching it. To do that though, they've got to deal with the dragon somehow. For their first attempt, Frieren has Fern hit the dragon with a basic offensive spell. When that doesn't work and the dragon wakes up, she ditches Fern, leaving her to face the dragon solo. It doesn't take long for Fern to realize how dangerous the dragon is, so she splits and meets up with her teacher in a safe spot. After thinking it over, they decide they're gonna need a buddy. That night, they head back to Eisen to chat. Eisen tells them to look for his former apprentice, Stark, who's now living in a village near the canyon. When Frieren asks Eisen if Stark's a good warrior, he doesn't say a word. The next day, they finally reach the village and quietly look for the guy. Somewhere along the way, Fern asks Frieren about the grimoire in the dragon's nest, and Frieren says it has a spell that lets you see through people's clothes. As they debate how useful that spell is, a granny shows up and tells them Stark is looking for them. On their way to Stark's place, the woman shares the hero story of Stark. Turns out, the dragon attacked the village 3 years ago and left after a standoff with Stark, who just appeared out of nowhere. After hearing such a brave tale, Frieren and Fern feel pretty good about this Stark guy. When they finally get to his training spot, they approach the fiery redhead, who tries to show off a scar he got from an earlier fight. Once he realizes who Frieren is, he gets serious and asks if his master sent them to bring him back. Frieren explains she needs his help to be their frontliner so they can take down the solar red dragon together. Before saying yes, Stark asks Frieren why she wants the grimoire so badly. Frieren admits it's because a friend of hers praised the spells she collected. After hearing her wild reasons, Stark agrees to help, but then asks if she can really beat the dragon. Frieren tells him that if he can keep the dragon busy for 30 seconds, she can cast a spell strong enough to take it down. Stark replies by asking why he has to do that. At this point, Frieren just asks if he's ever fought monsters. Stark drops the tough guy act and starts crying, begging Frieren to save his sorry life. He claims he got lucky 3 years ago because he was frozen until the dragon ran off. Not long after, the villagers decided to praise him and call him a hero. Fern is totally disgusted by his display of cowardice and asks Frieren to ditch this loser. But Frieren walks over to check out the crevice in the mountain behind Stark. After feeling it for a bit, she tells Stark to get his act together. Later that night, Frieren and Fern talk about Stark's heroism with the pub owners. When Fern gets cocky with her insults, Frieren reminds her how pathetic she was in her first monster fight. Fern shuts up and finishes her food. Soon afterward, Frieren heads to the inn and tells Fern to see if the doofus is okay before hitting the hay. As Fern heads out, Frieren remembers her run-in with Eisen a few weeks back and finally figures out that guy's origin story. Meanwhile, Fern arrives at Stark's training grounds only to find him digging into the mountain as he keeps training. She calls him out in disbelief and Stark stares back at her. When she finally comes to her senses, Fern asks Stark why he's training so hard if he's so set on not fighting the dragon. Stark goes on another ramble, telling her he's just putting on a show because the villagers believe his presence is keeping the dragon at bay. Fern asks him what his plan is if the dragon actually attacks the village. Stark admits that when that day comes, he'll have to defend the village, but he also hints that he might just bail. As for the scar on his forehead, he says it came from his master, not the dragon, when Eisen was let down by him. Fern takes his rough hand and tells him she believes he'll stick around if the dragon shows up. Stark gets a bit uncomfortable and wonders if Fern is trying to be cheesy. Fern explains that when she first encountered a monster, she had to handle it all on her own. At first, she ran away for her life, but eventually, she found the guts to face the monster and took it down quickly. She tells Stark that his determination to protect the village is real, and that kind of resolve could take down 10 fiery red dragons if it meant keeping the village safe. After she leaves, Stark thinks about what she said and strengthens his resolve. Fern heads back to the inn to tell her master about her chat with Stark. The next day, they head back to Stark's training spot and feel let down when they don't see him there. After attempting to get Fern to play tag with the dragon, Stark finally shows up to get things going. Before they face the dragon, Frieren asks Stark why he cares about the village so much. Stark replies that he's grown to love the people there over the past 3 years and would do anything to protect them. Once they reach the dragon's nest, Frieren spots Stark's trembling hands and chuckles a little. When Stark tries to make a fuss about it, Frieren tells him she's laughing because that's exactly how his master used to feel before facing a big enemy. With that, Stark steps up and stands in in front of the dragon, unsure of what to do next. He knows he's got to keep the monster busy for 30 seconds, so he digs deep to confront his fears and fight the dragon. As he closes in on it, he realizes it's okay to be scared as long as he's got the will to face his fears. Before long, the battle kicks off, and Frieren starts to understand why Aizen smacked his student back in the day. It turns out Aizen wasn't disappointed or mad at Stark. He was actually terrified of the power Stark had, so much so that his instinct kicked in and he struck the kid. Aizen saw just how strong Stark could become and felt positive about his future. Now that Stark is deep in the fight, he does everything he can to defend against the dragon's attacks. When he gets the edge, he lands a huge blow that brings the dragon down. With 30 seconds gone, Stark yells over to Frieren, pushing her to attack the dragon. Frieren, who already knows the dragon is done for, doesn't move and only spills the beans to Stark after he throws enough insults her way. A few minutes later, the girls come down to thank Stark for dealing with the dragon. Shortly after, Frieren and her apprentice start checking out the giant pile of junk left by the dragon. Stark chats about what his master used to say about the elf going through the trash. Frieren remembers the night she wowed her travel buddies by making shaved ice with one of her magic tricks. Even though Aizen didn't get the significance of that little stunt, Himmel the hero was totally convinced otherwise. The next day, Stark says goodbye to the village and sets off with the girls after they grab their gifts for taking down the dragon. After walking a little while longer, they stop to use a spell from the grimoire. Eventually, they ask Stark what he plans to do next, and he says he's going to travel with them. After a few more days on the road, they finally roll into the fortress city of Wall. As soon as they get there, they meet this giant guardian at the checkpoint to the northern lands. He tells them they can't go past the gates because he thinks it's too dangerous for them. When he's called to the Castellan's house, the big guy stands up and warns Frieren and the kids to be careful and behave before heading out. Once he's gone, Frieren and the crew explore the town and just hang out there until they eventually get through the checkpoint whenever that might be, which could take a few years. Stark and Fern share surprised looks at Frieren's laid-back attitude. When she goes off to do her thing, the duo splits up to check out the city. Stark heads straight to the nearest restaurant to dig into some yummy jumbo plates, but he can't stop whining and complaining about it. Soon after, Fern shows up to join him and grabs a glass of milk to sip on. Stark asks her why she looks so mad, and Fern starts by asking him if he's cool with chilling in the city for another 2 years just waiting for the checkpoint to open. When Stark says no way, she urges him to come with her so they can go find an easier way out of town. Once they get outside, Stark suggests flying over the big wall, but there's a barrier stopping that from happening too. In the next few scenes, they hit up villagers and locals for any hints. When they get nothing, Fern throws in the towel, but Stark is still game. He tells her they should ask the black market folks for some info on the checkpoint. Fern instantly agrees and starts talking to every shady character they can find in the slums. After spending ages asking for help, they still come up empty. Stark then decides to check out the guard station, having nothing to lose. Before they get there, Fern asks him why he's so keen to get past the checkpoint. Stark replies he doesn't have a ton of time. Fern asks why that is, and Stark says he needs to get back in time to share all his wild stories with his old, frail master, Aizen. He feels it's the only way to repay Aizen for taking care of him, and if he takes too long, Aizen might kick the bucket before he gets the chance to say thanks. Fern processes the thoughtfulness of Stark, and they get back to searching. After wandering the streets for a bit longer, Fern finally spots Frieren trying to keep a low profile. Stark starts grilling her, thinking she's gotten into trouble again. This time, Frieren says she's just been shopping as usual, and they happen to start following her. Just then, the big guard from earlier shows up and apologizes to Frieren for being rude before. Not long after that, the Castellan comes in to pay his respects too. Turns out, the village really respects the elf, so they let her through the checkpoint without any hassle to access the northern lands. Next, all the villagers line up to witness Frieren's visit, and even though the special treatment isn't her favorite thing, Frieren has no choice but to go with it. As they leave the village for the northern lands, Frieren wishes she'd had more time to learn about the village's magic. On their way to their first town in the northern lands, Frieren starts daydreaming about her 10-year adventure with the heroes. Back in the day, she had just gotten a fake grimoire from the legendary mage Flam, and was complaining about how wild people can get when they're trying to con others. After a few hours of dreaming, she wakes up to find her buddies, Fern and Stark, making breakfast for all of them. Fern is the first to notice her awake and is shocked that Frieren could get up this early. Before she goes back to sleep, Fern quickly gives her a massage and feeds her some breakfast, making sure Frieren's wide awake so they can keep moving towards the first settlement in the northern lands. When they reach Ing Road, which is in the northern lands, Frieren and her crew stop to help clear a landslide blocking the path to the nearest town. The traveler, who asked for their help, stands nearby, watching them work. He thanks them a ton for the help they're giving him. At one point, Stark gets tired and asks Frieren why they can't just use magic to move the guy's caravan past the landslide. Frieren explains that if they do that, other travelers could get stuck like this guy. Stark gets it and stays quiet until they're halfway done clearing the rocks. They then ask the traveler why landslides happen in that area, and the old man says it's due to constant wars with demons. Stark nods and ends up playfully bantering with Fern, who keeps calling him Mr. Stark. After they get past their little spat, they finish clearing the rocks and follow the old man to his town to chill for a few days. On the way, the old man is amazed to learn Frieren is an elf. since he's never seen one. Frieren then explains how elves feel indifferent about reproduction and prefer solitude. When they get to the town's gates, the vibe is busier than usual. The old man tells them the town is gearing up for the Liberation Festival, celebrating the day Himmel and his crew defeated the Demon King. Frieren doesn't want to reveal she's an elf, so she keeps asking odd questions about the festival. Eventually, she remembers a time when Himmel was acting like a jerk, giving silly reasons for his obsession with having statues made in their honor. Back then, Frieren didn't care about those statues, but Himmel wanted them up so she wouldn't feel lonely once they were all gone. That night, Frieren and her crew check out the statues the town decorated in their honor. After chatting about traditions and such, they hit the hay and leave town the next day. Before they get too far, Stark asks Frieren where they're headed, and she replies, "Heaven." This makes him go quiet. A few weeks later, the trio arrives in Graf Granat's territory, also in the northern lands. At first, Frieren thinks the town seems normal, until she detects something weird demon magic. Out of nowhere, she readies her staff and points it toward the source of the magic. Suddenly, 3 demons appear at the gate up ahead with Graf Granat, and Frieren gears up to take one out. Luckily, the guards manage to stop her just in time. Soon, the Graf and a supposed demon peace envoy, Lord Lugner, get closer to check out this imposter's strength. Lugner asks Graf to confirm he didn't send the assassin after him. Granat reassures him that Frieren is acting solo. Lugner believes Graf and gets ready to size up his new enemy. After a bit of tense talk with the mage, Graf has the guards toss Frieren into the dungeon for the time being. Hours later, Stark and Fern check in on their master down in the dungeon. They tell her she's been hit with a 2-year jail sentence, and Frieren just brushes it off like it's no big deal. When they get to the main topic, Fern asks Frieren if she knows about Aura, the guillotine. Frieren explains that the demon is one of the 7 sages of destruction who served the Demon King. Fern continues, saying that the demon has been battling the town for ages since regaining her lost powers, and has never faced anyone strong enough to take her down. After all these endless fights, they're finally here to discuss a peace treaty. Frieren scoffs at the obvious plan the demon has to undermine the town from within, but when Stark doesn't buy the demon's innocent act, Frieren decides to give him the lowdown on how dangerous they really are. She recounts her last run-in with demons about 80 years ago when she was with Himmel and the gang. One night, the whole village turned against a demon kid for eating one of their own daughters. When it came time to kill the demon, Himmel hesitated because the kid looked cute. Bored with the drama, Frieren stepped up to eliminate the little punk, but the village chief had mercy on the demon boy, thinking he could somehow redeem him. That decision blew up in his face years later when the demon boy turned on him and killed him to replace the daughter he had eaten with the chief's own daughter. The next time Himmel and the others found out, they didn't hesitate to finish off the demon. Even in its final moments, the demon tried to mess with the humans' minds, and Frieren asked why. The demon said it was because humans taught them words to deceive. After finishing her story, Frieren lays out the harsh reality for her team and pushes them to keep investigating. The following day, Lugner and his 2 sidekicks hang out, waiting for Graf Granat to show up for their meeting. While they wait, they discuss that strange mage who popped up in town yesterday. Lugner thinks he recognizes her but can't quite place where he's seen her. Meanwhile, Frieren senses the town's destruction on the horizon and plans to escape from prison when the chaos kicks off. Finally, when Graf shows up, he takes the demons to his late son's room and shows them the sword his son wielded proudly before he was killed in the battle against Aura 10 years ago. After sharing a few more details about his son, Graf flips on Lugner and threatens to kill him. Lugner scans the room and plays the father card on Graf, telling him his own dad was also killed in that battle, which is why he's there to negotiate peace. After hearing Lugner's plea, Graf changes his mind and takes them to the meeting room. On their way, Liney, one of Graf's subordinates, asks him what a father is, and Lugner admits he doesn't know. At the balcony, he tells her to stand by until they get to Graf and convince him to lower the town's defenses so Lady Aura can feed on the humans. When he checks on the other subordinate, Drott, Liney mentions that the idiot went to deal with an obstacle. At that moment, Drott shows up in the dungeons, takes out the guard on duty, and finds himself at Frieren's cell. He thinks Frieren is an easy target he can take down. Frieren gives him a heads up that she's stronger than he thinks, but as expected, the fool doesn't listen. Before showing off his hidden magic wires, Drott asks Frieren who she thinks she is. Frieren replies that she's tougher than Aura the guillotine herself, and Drott just laughs, thinking she's bluffing. When push comes to shove, Drott reveals his deadly magic wires wrapped around Frieren's neck, lifting her up in the air. Frieren, already prepared for this move, gathers mana around her neck to stop the wires from cutting through. Drott gives her props for being quick on her feet and keeping her cool, since most mages would have panicked. Then, he tightens the wires, aiming to slice through Frieren's mana and her head at the same time. Frieren rolls her eyes at his cocky expression, thinking he can take her down so easily, but before he can even finish his thought, she's already sliced off one of his arms. In a flash, her hands are around his neck. He tries to play it off by begging for mercy, but Frieren finishes him off before he can even get the words out. After taking out one of the demons, Frieren feels she should let Graf know what happened so he's aware of the other 2. Unfortunately, when she makes it outside the dungeon gates, she finds a guard's headless body waiting for her and sneaks past before anyone notices she's gone. Meanwhile, Fern and Stark are chilling over a big lunch at a random joint in town. Once they're done eating, Fern gets up and tells Stark it's time to hit the palace and asks Graf to free Frieren. If they can get her out fast, they'll have a shot at taking down those those annoying demons before they wipe out the town. But before they can move, Stark takes a moment to recognize the strength of the demon named Lugner. He knows that Jerk is strong and cocky, having ignored both him and Fern when they first met. Stark gets so freaked out that his hands start shaking, spilling his drink. As he cleans up, he warns Fern to watch out for those demons, since they're probably with Graf right now. Fern doesn't see a problem with that, so she urges Stark to hurry up so they can get there quickly. Right after Drott bites the dust, Liney and Lugner notice his mana vanishing. Instead of being upset, they pause to wonder who that super powerful mage is. Lugner realizes he's seen her before, but can't remember where. Before they can figure it out, Graf and his crew burst into the room, accusing them of sending Drott behind their backs to attack their guard. Lugner tries to deny it, but all signs point to Drott, who's conveniently not there to defend himself. Graf knows Frieren is a strong mage and wouldn't dare attack a guard. With nothing left to lose, Graf has his men surround Lugner and Liney. Soon enough, they have their swords drawn, and Graf asks Lugner one last time to bring out his guy to clear things up. Fed up with the interrogation, Lugner decides to take matters into his own hands. Without a second thought, he cuts himself and uses his magic to turn his blood into a long, flexible, sharp blade, which he uses to take down all the soldiers except Graf. After dispatching the pesky soldiers, he turns to Graf and fights him for a minute before stopping to explain what words really mean to demons. He then riles up the grieving father by trashing his son's memory, before stabbing himself with the same sword Graf is holding and jabbing him with the magic blood blade. With Graf wounded, Lugner takes control of the castle. He stops the fight right there and locks Graf up until he spills how to break the barrier protecting the town. That evening, Fern and Stark spot Frieren walking through the town square with her cloak pulled over her head. They recognize her right away and follow her to a secluded spot to chat. Frieren fills them in on everything that went down in the cell, including the guard Drott took out, and asks what they think about it. Fern responds with logic and pleads with Frieren not to leave them behind in the town. Frieren smiles, telling them not to sweat the two losers, they're not as tough as they think. With that, she turns away from her friends and sets off to tackle her next mission. Before she gets too far, Stark drops to his knees, begging to stay behind, but Fern, embarrassed by his antics, drags him back into town. Not long after, Frieren uses her magic detection skills to scan the entire country for big mana reserves. Eventually, she picks up on one about 10 kilometers away and realizes that Aura the Guillotine, one of the 7 mages of destruction, is hiding her army in plain sight. Frieren smiles at the thought of battling a strong opponent and hopes Aura is worth her time. That night, Stark and Fern creep into the mansion under the cover of darkness to find Graf and take out the peace envoys. They explore a few dimly lit rooms after sneaking into the inner chambers and slip in through an open window quietly. Meanwhile, on one of the upper floors, they spot Lugner with Liney and a wounded Graf tied to a chair. Before torturing Graf, Lugner explains what magic is and how demons came together to craft spells that surpass human logic. He mentions genius mages like Flam, the legendary mage, and curses her for making barriers like the one that has protected the town for ages. If it weren't for her, they would have taken over this town long ago. Now that he's got Graf in his grasp, Lugner demands Granat teach him how to break the barrier, keeping the town safe. He gives Granat one last shot to reveal where the grimoire is, but Granat stays silent. Frustrated, Lugner leaves him to stew over his next move and goes off with Liney to continue searching for the grimoire. Once he's gone, Stark sneaks into the room to rescue Granat. Just as he's about to untie him, Stark starts trembling, and Granat notices. They have a quick chat before Stark steadies himself and desperately tries to cut through the tough rope. Granat soon loses hope and tells Stark to take his necklace to show the guard so they can start evacuating the citizens. Stark stands up, pulls out his axe, and prepares to break the fancy chair to save Granat. Just then, Lugner and Liney walk in and find Stark shaking in front of them. Granat denies knowing Stark, and Lugner offers him a chance to bolt before it's too late. Stark, offended by Lugner's underestimation, charges at him. Lugner welcomes the challenge and quickly injures Stark's arms. After pinning Stark down, Lugner calls him a fool for going solo. At this moment, Stark calls for Fern, and she shows up with a surprise attack that leaves a hole in Lugner's chest. Stunned by Fern's mastery over her mana, Lugner can't comprehend what just happened. He asks Fern about the spell she used, and she tells him it's just Zoltrak. Lugner gets ticked off and tells her to stop messing around. He fires more questions at her to figure out how she learned such a spell, but Fern ignores him. Before round 2 kicks off, Fern and Stark get Granite out of there into safety. After they leave, Lugner tells Liney that he'll have blood on his hands because of those two, so they can't lose track of them. Next, he discusses the new spell with Liney, and remembers which mage used a similar spell on him ages ago, Frieren. In that moment, Lugner finally realizes who the mysterious mage is. He calls Frieren the slayer of demons and a genius he despises. Meanwhile, Frieren catches up to Aura to halt her army. Stark and Fern take Granat to a local church to get him fixed up. Once the doctor finishes treating him, Granat tries to get up and chat with his rescuers. He thanks them for saving his skin and promises to forgive their mage buddy for rescuing them from the demon's trickery. Fern tells him that Frieren didn't kill the guard, and Granat admits he knows that. More importantly, when he hears the mage's name is Frieren, he feels dumb for disrespecting her and tossing her in the dungeon in the first place. face. Granat goes on to explain that it was Frieren and the heroes from his grandfather's time who chased Aura and the Demon King away from their village, giving them at least 60 years of peace and prosperity. Now that Aura is way stronger than before, it's anyone's guess what could happen to those who stand up to her. At the same time, Frieren reintroduces herself to Aura, her old frenemy, and politely asks her to crawl back into whatever hole she came from and leave the town alone. Of course, Aura isn't about to back down without a fight, so she sends a few of her undead soldiers to take on Frieren. Frieren easily defends herself against the soldiers, and soon finds herself surrounded by Aura's puppets. After a quick chat with her old buddy, Frieren recognizes some of the armor on Aura's puppets, and decides it's time to end Aura for good. In response, Aura reveals her secret weapon, the Scales of Obedience. Back at the church, Granat explains what this special weapon is all about. The Scales of Obedience activate when Aura places her soul and that of her enemy on either side of the scale, and waits for it to tip in favor of the soul with the most mana. The one with less mana will have to obey her for all eternity. This weapon is super risky, but Aura, who's lived for 500 years, has one of the biggest mana reserves ever, so she's never lost a bet not once. Granat warns the adventurers never to underestimate the magic of the 7 Sages of Destruction. After all that, Fern asks if there's a way to counter it. Granat tells her that while the scales judge fairly, nobody has had as much mana as Aura in 500 years since she became a sage. Fern asks if there's a way to fight it, and Granat says there is. Turns out, if a soldier with a strong will gets caught in the trap, they can resist the obedience spell for a bit before they get fully controlled. During that time, Aura would find it hard to keep them in check. If she manages to control them, she'll get rid of them after she takes charge. Around this time, Frieren is getting overwhelmed by all the undead soldiers, so she uses a bunch of her mana to break the magic controlling them. This catches Aura off guard, and she asks why Frieren didn't use flashy magic to wipe them out like she did 80 years ago. Frieren says it's because Himmel scolded her. Aura says she's free to do whatever now that Himmel is gone, and Frieren takes that to heart. She stands up and decides to take down the demons mercilessly while she's at it. Stark gets ready after making sure Graf is safe, so he can head out and track down the demons. Fern warns him not to get too cocky, since those demons can pack a punch, but Stark insists someone has to put a stop to them, so he's off to do the Lord's work. Inspired, Fern decides to tag along, but Stark tells her to help get the townsfolk out while he looks for Frieren, and begs her to come help defeat the demons for them. They agree on the plan and get moving. Before they part ways, Fern notices Stark's bloodied arms and makes a fuss about it. Stark playfully points out the bloodstain on her robe and asks about it. Fern quickly spots the mana in the blood and tosses her robe aside. Just as she's about to take off Stark's robe, Lugner and Liney sneak up on them, while Liney conjures an axe and slams Stark down. Stark quickly gets back up and realizes Liney's technique is from Eisen. Meanwhile, Lugner talks for a few seconds before getting to the point. Fern allows him to ask her a few questions to buy some time. Lugner underestimates her and asks about Stark's strength. Fern tells him Stark is Eisen's best student, but Lugner just rolls his eyes. Then he asks where Frieren is, and Fern tells him Frieren fled town after killing a guard. Before asking anything else, Lugner steps away to think. He figures Frieren must have left to hunt down and eliminate Aura. In that small opening, Fern grabs her staff, breaks free from Lugner's grip, and gets close enough to threaten him. After blabbing about why he's such a proud jerk, Fern warns Lugner she'll blast a hole in his chest. Lugner dares her to try and says he'll have her head flying off before she even gets close. Before anything happens, Fern remembers the time she asked Frieren about her magic strength. It was a regular day, and they had just taken out a herd of demon horses. She recalls Frieren mentioning her speed in casting spells, which is why she usually makes Fern do most of the demon slaying. Moments before the fight starts, there's a tense silence between them. Then, in an instant, Lugner and Fern both attack and defend at lightning speed. From the clash, Fern spots Lugner's weak spot, his heart. With that in mind, they gear up for battle. Meanwhile, Liney stands over Stark's unconscious body, thinking she's won. Just then, Stark gets back up and tells her not to celebrate yet, because he's still ready to fight. Meanwhile, Lugner and Fern are still going at it hard. After putting up with all of Fern's attacks, Lugner finally admits she's got some serious skills, and gets mad at Frieren for teaching her how to be a pro mage. To try and take her down, he figures he'll just bombard her until she runs out of mana. What he doesn't realize is that Fern has way more mana left than he thinks. As the minutes roll on, he keeps taking her hits until he's forced to call for help from Liney. Over on the other side, Liney stays aggressive while Stark defends against her strikes. When they hit a stalemate, Stark asks her how she's so good at copying other people's moves. Liney gives him a quick rundown and keeps pressing the fight until she pins him down again. Not giving him a moment to catch his breath, she attacks non-stop. Stark ramps up his defense, but eventually, he loses his cool and takes a hit to the shoulder from one of Liney's strikes. Before throwing in the towel, he remembers a lesson from his master, Eisen, who taught him that losing is all in a warrior's master's mindset, and as long as he stands ready to fight, he hasn't truly lost. Knowing he still has some fight left in him, Stark gets back up and realizes his master's hits felt way lighter. Facing Liney again, he lets her slash him in the belly with her imitation axe. At the same time, Lugner and Fern ramp up their attack range, and Liney cuts right through Stark's wide-open defense. Now that she's fallen into his trap, Stark unleashes a lightning strike to take her out. Lugner catches something off with Liney's mana and gets distracted for a moment. Fern uses this chance to blast a Zoltrax spell at him and punches a hole through his chest, taking his heart out with the attack. Before the main story kicks off, we get a flashback showing Frierin's early life with her master Flam, 1,000 years ago when she was saved from certain death by the legendary mage. In this flashback, a young Frierin strolls through the woods with Flam, chatting about the dishonor that comes from tricking demons. Flam reminds her of that jerk Basalt who wrecked her elven village and tells her that demons are all scumbags who don't care about honor, honesty, or fairness. So, why should she, being human, play fair with them? If being called a disgrace to humanity means outsmarting demons and taking them down before they catch on, then she's all in for that title. After taking a fatal hit to the heart, Lugner just sits there, accepting his fate. Before he goes down for good, Fern asks him about Frierin's fight with the so-called Lady Aura. Lugner shrugs it off, confident she'll lose. When Fern presses him on why he thinks that, he claims it's because Lady Aura has way more mana than anyone in the demon army. He totally underestimates Frierin's abilities, and tells Fern she's guaranteed to lose if Aura decides to weigh their souls on the scale of obedience. Fern shoots back, saying her master always comes up with some trick to outsmart Aura and her ridiculous reserves. At this point, something doesn't sit right with Lugner. He can't wrap his head around how Fern keeps hitting him hard despite her weak mana. It suddenly clicks for him, and he figures out the trick behind Fern and Frierin's low mana output. But before he can say a word, Fern finishes him off. The flashback continues, and now it shows the moment Flam first met Frieren. She randomly stumbled upon a devastated elven village and found out the culprits were demons led by Basalt the Throne, a general from the demon army. As she searches, she finds a teenage elven mage with loads of mana who even managed to defeat the great general, but the battles took a toll on her. Flam gets grossed out by Frierin's blunt approach in combat, but just when she's about to leave the elf to her fate, Frieren speaks up, telling Flam she knows how powerful she is and to stop hiding. Flam is impressed by her perception and decides to take her under her wing. She then piggybacks the wounded, indifferent elf out of the burning village after learning her name. On the way to her place, Frieren asks Flam what happened to her village. Flam explains that the elven village is gone, so there's no one to worry about leaving behind. Frieren requests to be put down so she can go her own way, but Flam refuses. Instead, she tells Frieren she's going to be her new student, so she better get used to it. Not long after, Flam senses 3 demon mages on their tail and stops to face them. When the mages show up, they demand Flam hand over the girl and scram. Flam puts Frieren down and teaches her her first lesson. She knows how foolish and cocky the demons get when their magic is questioned. Having dealt with them as a powerful mage, Flam has picked up a clever trick to catch these idiots off guard. Just when they think they've got it all figured out, Flam launches a quick attack that wipes them out in seconds. After that, she turns to Frieren and explains how she pulled it off. Frieren gets it and tells Flam she realized she hides her massive mana by controlling the output, making others think she's weak. Flam nods, acknowledging her response, and takes her back to her home in the woods. A few days later, Flam kicks off Frieren's training after patching up her injuries. On the way to the fields, she chats about her lifestyle with the young elf, who's pretty stoked about it. When they finally reach the fields, Flam has Frieren dial down her mana output to just 1/10 of what she usually puts out. Once she gets that under control, she'll bulk up her mana reserves by a ton while she's at it. As Frieren starts her training, she asks her master how long she plans to do this. Flam grins and tells her they'll need to spend their whole lives tricking demons into underestimating them so they can catch them off guard. Right now, Frieren stands in front of Aura and her army of undead with just a tiny bit of her mana leaking out. Aura kicks off a chat about Lugner and the other 2 losers biting the dust. When it's time to get serious, she challenges Frieren to wager her soul on a scale of obedience to see whose mana is stronger. Frieren takes a moment to size up Aura's huge mana pool, but stops herself from getting too overwhelmed when the ritual starts. Before anything goes down, we flash back to Frieren in another town with her master, gathering supplies. Along the way, she asks Flam why demons can't hide their mana like they do. Flam explains that demons are all about individualism and only care about their own achievements, not rules or order. To help Frieren get it, Flam breaks down the intense love-hate humans have for wealth and power, and tells her demons view mana the same way. Sure, they sometimes suppress their mana for stealth, but none are dumb enough to do it all the time, since that would blow their cover and mess with their status. After breaking all this down, Flam reminds Frieren how lucky she is to be an elf instead of a demon. Even after 3 years of constantly keeping her mana in check, she's still nailing it without breaking a sweat. Frieren credits it to having an awesome master. Fast forward 50 years in the flashback, Flam's gotten super old and wrinkly. One evening, she finds her apprentice practicing magic, just like always, and asks if she still loves magic the way she did back in the day. Frieren says yes, and Flam warns her never to make herself known in history so she can stay in the background until she finally takes down the Demon King. With that, she asks Frieren to plant flowers around her grave when she passes, and Frieren learns a flower spell right there. A few more years go by, and Flam eventually passes away, and Frieren honors her last wish. After laying her master to rest, Frieren moves on with her life, living like a regular side character, training whenever she can, and soaking up all the knowledge she can. Hundreds of years later, Himmel, Aizen, and the dopey Hyder finally meet her for the first time. Their introduction is a weird one since Frieren tries to shoo them away, but after a ton of persuasion from the hero himself, she finally agrees to join them on their date with the Demon King. The rest is history. Back in the present, Aura weighs her soul against Frieren's, grinning from ear to ear, thinking she's got Frieren beat. Frieren spots the smug look on Aura's face and asks why she's smiling so hard. Aura brushes her off and starts trash-talking Frieren's super low mana reserves. When the souls hit the scale and Aura's soul tips the balance, she gets overly confident and steps closer to Frieren, sword in hand, ready to chop her head off. Just then, the scales start to tilt in Frieren's favor, and she tells Aura she's seriously misjudged the situation. See, after nearly 1,000 years of training, keeping her mana suppressed has become second nature, so there's no way a 500-year-old demon would see through her act. Eventually, Frieren unleashes her massive mana reserves, making Aura realize just how foolish she's been for thinking she could outdo her. Once the scales tip in Frieren's favor, she turns her back to head home after ordering Aura to kill herself. Unable to defy Frieren's command, Aura does the unthinkable and ends her own life, left wondering where it all went south. By morning, Fern shows up at Aura's last battlefield and sees her master paying respects to the fallen soldiers who have finally been freed from Aura's zombie grip. Noticing the grim scene, Fern calmly walks over to her master and asks if she's finally taken down Aura, to which Frieren replies yes. Shortly after, Graf and Stark arrive, and Frieren attempts to make a run for it. Luckily, Graf has already pardoned her, so Frieren remains free. As the guys approach the zombie soldier's armor, the man thanks Frieren for honoring the fallen. A bit later, Graf checks out the armor of the dead soldiers while Frieren and her pals reminisce about the good old days with Himmel, who used to give her a hard time for using flashy spells. After chatting about her past enough, she praises both Fern and Stark for handling Lugner and his buddy, Liney, without her help. Stark and Fern try to play it off, but things take a turn when Granat and his crew discover the armor of his long-dead son, with the Granat family crest necklace still resting on the shoulders. Granat pays his last respects to his son and heads back to his town. Days later, Granat finally meets with Frieren and her crew to discuss their reward. While Granat has been busy doing great things for them, he just can't wrap his head around why Frieren would only ask for the grimoire about their defensive barriers and more. Frieren explains that she's been into collecting spells and grimoires from all over the world, so there you go. Granat then tells her to chill with the formalities because he knows she sees him as a kid compared to how long she's lived. But Frieren opts to keep it formal due to her past experience when Hyder and Himmel were almost executed just for being casual with the Graf. At this point, Stark is already fidgeting, and it doesn't help when the lumberjack shows up with an axe in hand. Mistaking him for the executioner, Stark collapses right on his knees and gets floated out of Granat's room after the meeting. Next up, Frieren and Fern catch everyone's attention as they stroll through the town square with a knocked-out Stark floating midair. At first, people think they're a bit odd, but soon they realize the heroes passing by deserve their respect. Over the next 6 months or so, Frieren and her crew kick back in the town and meet more people every day. At one point during their stay, they witness the final burial of the fallen soldiers from Aura's army, including Graf Granat's son. Once their 6-month stay wraps up, Frieren and her friends stock up on supplies and get ready to hit the road to heaven. On that day, Graf walks them to the gates, cautioning them to watch out for the harsh northern plateau since travel is restricted and only first-class mages are allowed to pass through certain areas. Frieren gets confused about what a first-class mage is and asks Fern for the lowdown. Fern pulls out her certification, showing she's a third-class mage. Frieren rolls her eyes at that nonsense and asks Graf if there's a city up north where they can get her certified. Graf tells her they can get it in Oberst, the largest city up north from theirs. After explaining how to get to the big city, Graf thanks Frieren and her crew one last time before they head off on their journey. Less than a day later, it starts snowing and Frieren gets all messed up from it. When Fern asks her about the winters in the north, Frieren tells her it's nothing but bad news. Turns out she was spot on because the blizzards just keep getting worse day by day. Before they even hit the Schwer Mountains, they're already lost and shaking like leaves from the freezing cold. Stark's the first to go down from hypothermia, and Fern tries to revive him, but he's way gone. Unable to use magic to carry him, Fern decides to haul his lazy butt and drag him to the nearest shelter up the road. Predictably, that annoying jerk gives Fern the creeps the whole way, since she smells way better than he has in years. After an hour of trekking, they finally hit the shed Frieren mentioned. Fern senses someone inside and suggests they head back, but Frieren ignores the crying kid and just opens the door to find a swole elf dude doing squats to warm up from the harsh winter chill. Fern, who's never seen a guy with a six-pack before, initially thinks he's a total creep, so she yanks Frieren back and suggests they find another place. Just then, the guy opens the door and scowls at Fern for calling him a pervert. When he sees Frieren is an elf, He invites them in and has them start a fire in his fireplace. Once they warm up and get past the small talk, the swole elf introduces himself as Kraft the monk. After learning Frieren and Fern's names, they chat about where they're headed. When Kraft hears they're going to heaven, he praises them for being holy. Frieren tries to downplay it, but then Stark's body gets even colder to the touch. As they worry about the poor guy, it turns out he's just deep in thought about his favorite dessert. When he finally wakes up, he finds himself all bundled up in Kraft's arms and freaks out, shaking everyone else awake. Turns out Kraft was just sharing some body heat to help the kid out. When Stark snaps back, he checks out Kraft's nice body and asks him about his workout routine. After learning the monk's name, Stark asks him to train him. But before diving into that, Kraft has the girls follow him outside to dig out some supplies from his food cart buried in the snow. On their way back to the shed, Kraft asks Frieren if she knows anything about him, but when Frieren says no, he just gives her the same line. Fern tries to let him know she was the one who took down the Demon King with a party of heroes, but Kraft didn't even know demons were a thing. When they get back to the shed, they just chill there for the next 6 months until winter is over. During that time, Stark trains with Kraft as much as possible to gear up for whatever comes next. Once it's time to head out, Kraft gives Frieren a carved necklace and talks about this goddess everyone seems to worship. Frieren makes it clear she's not pious at all, but Kraft hopes for everyone's sake that the goddess is real. If not, his life would be meaningless. He tells Frieren to share her life story so he can praise her, since she doesn't believe in any goddess. At this point, Frieren recalls a memory from 80 years ago with Hyder the priest, when the tipsy guy brought up the same topic. Back then, Hyder was the only one in her circle who knew she'd been pushing down her mana the whole time. He found her intriguing and wanted to learn more. Frieren brushes herself off, telling him she's nothing special and has lived like a zombie. Hyder chuckles and tells her to tell her life story since he might have a mage kid soon. Remembering that moment, Frieren realizes she doesn't need to retell her life story since she already did it before. Kraft asks about the weirdo who asked her the same thing, and she tells him that guy's in heaven now. Soon, they all get their stuff together, and Kraft heads off. Fern and Stark do their best to say goodbye, knowing they'll never see that nice monk again in their lifetimes. Weeks later, Frieren and her friends are trekking through heavy snow to reach the next town a few miles ahead. Midway into their trip, Frieren dozes off and almost hits her head on the ground, but Fern catches her just in time. A moment later, both Fern and Stark are stressing about what to do with Frieren, since she just collapsed. Stark initially offers to carry her, but after reading his expression, Fern decides he doesn't have the best intentions and opts to carry the poor elf herself while continuing the trek. As she sleeps, Frieren drifts into dreamland, where she has a dream about a stingy jerk of a king who shortchanged them for the huge monster-slaying job she and her old hero gang did ages ago. On their way to their next stop, Himmel shows off his hero sword, and Frieren asks if it's the real deal. When Hyder says no, Himmel explains that a blacksmith gave it to him after he saved him when he was younger. Frieren then asks if that's why he became a hero, and Himmel clarifies that wasn't the case. The real reason he became a hero was to win a bet he made against Hyder back in the orphanage. Now that he's the real deal, the punk who challenged him back then is just a drunk priest, which really shows how ironic life is. Everyone laughs and has a good time. Meanwhile, Frieren stands there watching her buddies stroll into the sunset as she slips back into reality. Frieren wakes up, still thinking about the dream, and soon gets swept away by the harsh weather around them. She tells Fern and Stark to keep pushing ahead until they reach the village and sticks to Fern's back because she smells nice. At that point, Stark asks Fern if he can carry their master, but Fern still doesn't trust him at all. Eventually, they start moving again and stop when they hit the outskirts of the next northern town. There, Frieren hops off Fern's back and is welcomed by the young village chief, who greets her to the village of the sword. Frieren compliments the chief on how young and impressive she is, and asks about the destruction just outside the village. The chief explains that it's the work of the Lord of the Mountain. Around that time, Stark starts talking. Fern asks him if he's heard of this mountain before, and Stark says yes. According to the legends, this village is said to hold the hero's sword, which is believed to be placed in a sanctuary nearby. The legend states that whoever can pull the sword from the stone is a true hero. Over the years, countless mages and heroes have tried to pull it out, but none succeeded. That is, until 80 years ago when Himmel finally pulled it out. A few moments later, the village chief arrives at their cabin and makes them feel at home. As they warm up by the fire, the chief scolds Frieren for being late and for not completing her duty. Fern looks confused and asks Frieren what duty she's talking about. Frieren then explains she's referring to monster extermination and assures Fern that she'll get started on that the next day. The next day, Stark, Fern, and Frieren head up the mountains to take out some monster wolves before checking out a sketchy-looking cave. Stark finds a bunch of wolves and wipes them out, just hanging around for the chaos to kick in. Frieren tries to signal the guy to get out, but it's too late. The Mountain Lord shows up, a massive demon wolf. Frieren faces off with it, getting Stark to cut off one of its arms, while Fern throws up some magic shields for her protection. After letting her friends do the heavy lifting, she blasts the demon wolf to bits fights with Zoltrak. Right after that, Stark's left scratching his head because he doesn't understand why the hero sword is still stuck in stone when the legends always say Himmel took it. At first, Frieren tells some nonsense about demons being drawn to the sword and wanting to destroy it, but when Stark tells her to cut the crap, she admits Himmel actually messed up and couldn't pull it out. Turns out, he wasn't bummed about it either. Instead, he used it as motivation to show everyone that anyone can be a hero if they put in the effort. Fast forward 80 years, and Himmel proves his worth, becoming a better hero than anyone else out there. Fern asks Frieren why they made up that cover story. That's when Frieren shares why she loves working behind the scenes. She hates how future generations glamorize heroes, making everyone else feel small when they don't measure up. After chatting a bit more, Frieren and the other two ladies take off, leaving Stark sitting in the snow, lost in thought. With their work in the village wrapped up, Frieren and her crew hit the road for the Appetit region up north. They roll into town around New Year's and kick back at a nice inn. Soon after, Frieren dives into reading grimoires while Fern gets ready to go shopping. She asks her master to tag along, but Frieren prefers to stay inside. Before Fern leaves, Frieren reminds her it's Stark's birthday, so she should pick him up something nice. When Fern asks what Frieren plans on getting Stark, Frieren pulls out a potion that melts clothes and says guys love that stuff. Fern snatches the potion from her and pours it on her head, watching her clothes dissolve and leaving her totally naked before heading out. Frieren covers herself and starts brainstorming a solid gift for Stark. Just then, she trips over something and decides to use it. Fern is on a mission to find Stark, searching everywhere until she spots him counting cloud shapes that look like boobs on the edge of town. When she tries to talk to him, the dude's nonsense makes her back off. But after a bit, she gathers the guts to approach him and puts a stop to his boob jokes. Stark gets quiet and decides to tag along with Fern as they stroll around town. He starts asking her questions to see if he's been a bad guy. Fern only chimes in when she asks if there's anything he wants. Stark, puzzled, asks her to clarify. That's when Fern reminds him it's his birthday, and she wants to give him a present. Stark gets even more confused, asking if that's a birthday thing, since he's never gotten a gift from his dead family or master before. Fern is taken aback, thinking he might be messing with her, but it looks like he's being real. Stark then shares a wild backstory from when he was a kid. He grew up in a warrior village, but always lived in his brother's shadow. His bro, Stoltz, was a nice, strong warrior, while their dad was a jerk who didn't care for Stark, who was the weaker sibling. Still, Stoltz never held that against him, and often trained with the little confused redhead. Everything was cool until demons showed up and wrecked their village. Stark was the only one to get away clean because Stoltz sacrificed his life to save him. Hearing all this, Fern feels a mix of pride and sadness for the goofy dude, impressed by his brother's bravery. To make it up to him, she takes him to a gift shop and picks out something cheap he can treasure forever. Later that night, they get home to Frieren, whipping up big hamburger steaks for them all. Stark remembers his master doing the same thing, and Frieren tells him that it was just a tradition in their village to celebrate birthdays like that. After reflecting on those memories, Stark finally sees how much love he's received from both his brother and master over the years. As he recalls his last moment with Stoltz, he gets emotional when he takes his first bite of the hamburger steak. Ultimately, the girls join in the fun at the table, and they all have a great time that night. A few weeks later, Frieren and her crew roll into their next town and bump into a weird dude in the Alt Woods. He totally digs the adventurer life, wanting to be like Frieren and her squad, but lacks the guts to actually hit the road and go adventuring. Before they can do anything else, he spills his childhood story about how he almost teamed up with a buddy back in the day to travel the world and become an adventurer. After listening to his rambling, Frieren asks him why he's dishing out such nonsense. The guy says it's because he's stuck in a never-ending swamp while gathering firewood. He begs Frieren to rescue him from the mud that's about to swallow him up, but she hesitates since she doesn't want to get her hands dirty. Luckily, before he can sink too deep, Fern shows up and pulls him out of the mud. After that, they help the messy dude to the edge of his village, and he invites them to join his harvest festival to thank them for the help. But Frieren says they gotta hustle to a bigger town for supplies, so they'll catch him later. The dude bids them goodbye, but not too far down the road, Stark gets bitten by a nasty snake. He quickly realizes he's bleeding from his nose and asks the girls for help. Frieren and Fern sit him down and try different healing spells before deciding to fly him to the nearby village church for better treatment. They argue about it for a bit, but eventually, they zip the bleeding Stark over to the church. Once there, the priest checks him out and tells them it's too late to help him. Stark freaks out, but then the swamp guy from before pops back up to chat about random stuff. After yapping for a minute, he spots Stark, recognizes him, and heals him like it's no big deal. Not long after, he bails for the plaza. Once he's gone, Frieren talks to the priest about how brilliant his brother is, saying it's wild how the disgruntled guy fixed an incurable illness in a snap. The priest tells Frieren about Hyder's visit to the province, mentioning that the only thing Hyder is proud of is his priestly badge. But in terms of real talent, Sign, his brother, and that swamp guy totally outshine him. Ever since they lost their parents as kids, the priest has worried about his younger brother. Over time, he found out that Sane's dream is to become an adventurer and not just another boring village priest like him. Now that they're older, the priest feels bad for his brother, as he's gotten used to the dull routine of priest life. His first request to Frieren and the gang is to help him get Sign out of the village so he can experience life life again. Frieren and her crew got home that night arguing about whether to add another member to their gang. Fern and Stark thought it'd be cool to have a priest join them, but Frieren wasn't having any of it. Three's a crowd for her. Stark ignored her and headed down to the pub to check on Sign. When he got there, he found Sign acting like a total loser, drinking, smoking, and gambling with a bunch of shady characters. Stark was grossed out at first, but after some small talk, Sign invited him to join the gambling table. About an hour later, Fern could hear Stark yelling his head off. She woke Frieren up and rushed to find out what was going on. When they got there, they saw Stark and Sign nearly naked, just in their underwear. That's when Frieren realized Sign was a sore loser, so she talked some sense into him, shared a few of her own memories, and asked him to join their adventuring team, suggesting it'd be better than living out his pathetic life. Even after all that, Sign still turned them down. By then, Frieren was pretty fed up with the guy's cockiness, so she promised to get him on their team whether he wanted to or not. Just then, Fern showed up with all of Stark and Sign's stuff that she snagged back from the winner for free. She handed over their dirty clothes like she was dealing with a couple of little kids. After settling the gambling mess, Fern and the group talked about their new findings. Fern was kind of okay with Sign's drinking, but Frieren was more determined to get him on their team than ever. Over the next couple of days, Frieren kept trying to convince Sign to join them, but after all their efforts, he still didn't budge. They eventually talked to Sign's brother to figure out what Sign was into. His brother spilled that Sign loved gambling, booze, tobacco, and surprise older women, but they didn't have any older women to charm him into coming along. Just then, Sign popped up to ask his brother something, but when he saw Frieren and her crew again, he froze and bounced. Stark followed him outside and asked if he'd be down for traveling with an older woman. Sign said he was always down for anything wild. That's part of why he wanted to be an adventurer. When he asked Stark to show him where this older woman was, Frieren jumped in and let him know she was the one Stark was talking about. At that point, Sign looked super disappointed. Frieren tried to win him back by blowing him a kiss, but a kiss from someone as small as her made it awkward for Sign. The vibe got really weird after that, and Frieren wondered what went wrong. Eventually, Sign told them to cut the nonsense and give up on trying to drag him along. He then told his brother there was a good chance his friend was already dead. Frieren went back to trying to convince him again, asking why he couldn't follow them. Sign explained how he'd seen a meeting between his brother and Hyder when Hyder was alive. Hyder wanted to recruit his brother to go to the capital, but he chose to stick around and look out for Sign. Though Hyder admired his loyalty, he was still bummed he couldn't get him to the capital. After hearing everything Sign said, his older brother stepped up and slapped him hard. He made it clear he never felt bad about staying behind and would rather die than watch his brother mess up his life. Late that evening, Sign apologized to Frieren for his brother and worked things out with her, laying out his terms before heading out of town. As they took their first steps out, Sign asked where they were headed, and Frieren said heaven. He muttered some words and soon realized just how rude Fern was. After traveling for a few more days, they finally arrive in the Rod region up north. As they wander the town streets, Frieren remembers the last time she was there with Himmel and the crew, 80 years ago. She notices the town hasn't changed much. It still has cute shops and great infrastructure. When they get to the inn, Stark gets into a huge fight with Fern and storms out to cool down after letting her have it. Sign sees the whole drama unfold but can't stop Stark from leaving. He just sits inside and asks Frieren to fill him in on what happened. Turns out, it was Fern's birthday, and Stark didn't get her a gift, so she flipped out and acted all spoiled. This time, Frieren doesn't back Fern up, and Sign tries to explain that guys usually don't care about birthdays and anniversaries like girls do. Eventually, he tells her to chase after Stark and apologize. Frieren backs him up, so Fern starts searching for him. Eventually, she finds the poor guy sulking by the fountain in the plaza, lost in thought about his life choices. Not being able to approach him, Fern leaves and bumps into Sign, who's checking out some gifts to give her. After he makes comments about the gifts, Sign asks if she's found Stark. Fern lets him know that she has, but doesn't know how to talk to him. Sign realizes why she's acting this way and says it's because she hasn't had much practice talking to boys her age. While picking out a gift, Sign tells her not to blame Stark, since he probably doesn't even remember his own birthday. Even though she knows Sign's right, Fern argues that she gave Stark a present on his birthday, so he should do the same. Sign asks if she picked it out for him or if she went shopping with him. When Fern admits she went with him for it, Sign keeps dropping more truth bombs until he convinces her to go talk to Stark. After giving her birthday gift, he heads back to the inn after Fern apologizes for kicking him. An hour later, Fern finds Stark in the plaza checking out a statue of Himmel the hero. She calls him over, and Stark says he's sorry for not getting her a gift sooner. Honestly, the dude didn't know what she liked, and was too scared to ask her to pick something out because he thought she'd just get annoyed again. Fern tells him not to think like that and apologizes for being harsh. The two lovebirds kiss and make up. After they settle their little argument, Stark takes his new girl to a gift shop to find something nice for her. Meanwhile, Sign spots Frieren watching over Stark and Fern from the rooftop of a random building and calls her out for being sneaky. He then talks about the privilege of young people arguing and bonding before asking Frieren how she got over her teenage angst. When Frieren asks for some context, Sign realizes he's the only adult in their little group. Frieren soon matches his vibe and talks about Hyder's issues and how he annoys her. Sign is kind of shocked hearing all that since the Hyder he knows is a little cooler and calmer. Before saying anything else, Frieren remembers another time with Hyder when he was old and nearing the end. That night, she'd asked him how he became so mature and responsible compared to the gross person he used to be. Hyder goes off on some fancy philosophy about life and even brings up Fern. Frieren asks more questions until she gets up to pat his head as a kind of praise. Just then, she pats Sign's head the same way and calls him a proper adult. Sign thanks Frieren for the gesture, but wishes an older woman would do that for him. A few days later, the four of them hitch a ride through the Bandwoods to get to the next town. After chatting with the driver for a bit, Frieren spots the cute new bracelet on Fern's wrist and asks about it. Fern gets a little shy when she admits it was a gift from Stark. Frieren recognizes the pattern and starts digging through her stuff, looking for the ring Himmel gave her long ago. After tossing her stuff around, she finally finds the ring. An avian monster grabs their carriage and lifts it into the air. Frieren apologizes for dropping her guard and quickly shifts gears to find a way to avoid becoming Monster Chow. She begins by sharing her experience of flying, but Stark interrupts, telling her to get to the point and just share her plan. Eventually, Frieren decides to fly out with the driver while Fern pairs up with Sign for a safer landing. She tells Stark to just jump down, but he's not having any of that for clear reasons, leaving Frieren puzzled. Fern suggests they levitate the whole carriage using magic, and Frieren considers it. Meanwhile, the avian monster dives down to smash the carriage into the ground so it can snack on the remains. Frieren jumps out of the carriage and takes out the demon with a Zoltrak spell. After dispatching the beast, their carriage crashes into the thick forest. Luckily, Frieren manages to slow their descent just before they hit, so while they lose some gear, they're still alive. By nightfall, Sign tends to the horse and joins the others in sulking, especially since they're stranded. Thankfully, they keep their spirits up and spend the next few days gathering wood from the forest to fix the carriage while couch potatoes like Frieren hang out and organize her belongings. At one point, Sign learns about the bracelet Stark gave Fern for her birthday and gives the poor guy props for spending 3 grueling hours looking for the perfect gift. In the end, Stark is thrilled to have found something she appreciates. Moving on, Sign explains the symbolism of the pattern on the bracelet, the inverted lotus, telling Stark it's a gift lovers give each other. Stark freaks out a bit and tries to apologize to Fern, who can hear everything, for rushing things. Fern, being her usual stern self, scolds Stark when he offers to return the gift for something else. After that, the trio heads back to where they crashed and continues fixing the carriage however they can. Hours turn into days as everyone pitches in to keep things going. A few nights later, they finally finish repairing the carriage. Fern finds Frieren searching the woods and learns she's looking for the ring Himmel gave her 80 years ago. She joins her master in the search, but Frieren reassures her not to worry since she's gotten used to losing things by now. Fern tries to explain the meaning behind the patterns on the ring and bracelets, but Frieren brushes it off, saying it doesn't matter. She's ready to lose the ring, considering how accustomed she's become to it. Fern takes her master back to camp to ask for help. Their driver, overhearing this, gives Frieren a scroll with a spell from his hometown that might help find her ring. Frieren thanks him, grabs the scroll, and flies up into the air. After a quick trip down memory lane to the moment Himmel bought the ring for her, Frieren finally tries out the spell. Seconds later, the ring pings its location to her and turns out to be pretty close. Before going for it, Frieren recalls when she received the ring and goes to get it. The next day, Frieren holds the ring close and keeps smiling because now she understands why Himmel gave it to her. After traveling for a few more weeks, Frieren and her crew finally roll into the Lob Hills up north. For a bit, they're cruising towards the next town, with the carriage driver at the helm. After a few minutes of quiet, Sign finally pipes up, asking Fern and Stark how long they've been tagging along with Frieren. Once they share their answers, they keep rolling until Sign starts chatting again. This time, he gripes about how their crew's missing something crucial. Fern thinks they need a thief to help keep Frieren safe from treasure trap shenanigans, but Sign cuts deeper, saying what they really need is an older woman with a hotter bod. Stark shoots back that Frieren is old enough for him to handle, but then Sign challenges him to point out one curvy feature on her. To dodge any drama, Stark quickly changes the topic and points out the village ahead. Unfortunately, when they hit the village, they find everyone knocked out cold. Sign rushes over to check their pulse, and is relieved to find out they're still alive. Frieren suggests they should just leave the village as it is, which ticks Fern off. They eventually dig deeper into the situation, and discover that the villagers are under a curse. Frieren breaks it down for Stark, and he freaks out, thinking it might already be too late to save anyone. Thankfully, they've got a priest like Sign on their team, so he dives into figuring out the curse and how to break it while Frieren keeps on chatting. When she finally requests some proof, Sign asks for more time to wrap up his investigation. Meanwhile, Frieren and the other two start checking out the houses, and she explains all about being a priest and the perks that come with it, like how priests can resist curses better. She also mentions that even she, an elven mage, struggles against curses, but from what she can sense, it's clear the village is still feeling the curse's effects. Stark and Fern get anxious, worried they might end up like the villagers soon. Just then, Sign figures out the curse comes from a monster in the woods and urges them to hustle there before they all zonk out. Just as they're about to move, Stark collapses, falling victim to the curse. Frieren begs the priest to wake him up, but he says it's not gonna happen. So, they grab Stark and set off on their long trek, carrying him mid-air until they finally make camp as night falls. Not long after they settle in, Fern dozes off too. When Sign and Frieren notice, they set up a barrier around Fern and Stark before heading into the dark to hunt for the monster. As they get closer, Frieren warns Sign not to take the monster on alone, but just as he's about to respond, she falls asleep as well. After several failed attempts to wake her, Sign places her nearby and gives up. Moments later, the monster, which Sign identifies as a chaos flower, shows up looking like a man-eating plant and goes right after him. Sign does everything he can to dodge the flower's attacks. When he spots a weakness at its core, he launches a magic attack, but the chaos flower deflects it. With this setback, Sign starts brainstorming all sorts of ways to take it out. He thinks about waking Frieren up, but realizes there's no way he'd have enough time to explain the situation before she dozes off again. Almost ready to abandon that idea, he suddenly remembers a lesson Hyder taught him about Frieren back in the day. If Frieren is as fierce in battle as Hyder said, then his plan just might work. After dodging another attack from the Chaos Flower, Sign wakes her up and tries to explain what's happening. Without missing a beat, Frieren unleashes a flexible Zoltrak attack pattern to obliterate both the core and the monster. The next morning, Fern, Stark, Frieren, and Sign roll back into the village, and everyone is up and super grateful for them taking down that useless monster that was messing with their lives. After getting thanked by the hot village elder, Frieren and her crew finally hit the road to the next town. Somewhere on the way, Frieren gives a nod to Sign for his help earlier and gives him a friendly pat on the head. Soon, they arrive in Vorig, the fortress city, and stop over to Oberst. That's when Frieren realizes they're almost out of cash. Just as they're approaching the city gates, a nobleman spots them and rolls up in his carriage. He hops out with his butler, checks Stark out, and invites him to his mansion for a gig. Before anyone even realizes what's happening, Stark is inside the rich guy's mansion talking to him. The nobleman starts off by asking Stark his name, but Frieren cuts in, telling the guy to back off her frontliner. The dude takes offense and asks Stark if he needs his mommy to keep answering for him. At this point, Frieren stands up and tells her crew it's time to bounce, but when she remembers they're broke, she takes a deep breath and hears the nobleman's pitch. After some chit-chat, the guy takes Stark for a stroll around his fancy mansion. He asks Stark about his hometown in the Klee region, but Stark stays quiet. They end up in front of a huge mural of the nobleman's son on the wall, and both Fern and Frieren can see how much Stark looks like the man's son, Wirt. They ask how that's relevant to the job. The nobleman, Lord Orden, explains he needs Stark to pretend to be his son, who died in battle a month ago. Since no one knows Wirt is dead yet, Orden wants Stark to impersonate him for a few months to keep everyone's spirits up while they rebuild their forces. As the 3-month gig wraps up, Stark will have to attend this fancy soiree and act like Wirt to trick the influential folks. Once the soiree is done, Stark can take off. After hearing all this, Frieren asks about the pay, and Lord Orden mentions a really good amount. She then asks for a grimoire thrown in, and Orden agrees. Next, Stark asks the nobleman what's the deal with the scar on his head, and Orden tells him to wear it with pride, saying everyone will think he got it in the last battle. Stark grumbles about how tough life's about to get, and Fern tells him to suck it up and help the team make some cash. With that settled, Orden has Gable teach Stark some proper etiquette over the next few months while Frieren and the others live it up like royalty. One day, Stark bumps into Fern and tries out a new pose he just learned. Fern's heart skips a beat, but she doesn't let him know that his little gesture got to her. Stark eventually meets the man who calls himself his dad in the hallway and asks why he's being so rude to his son. Orden scoffs, saying he's just following his son's dying wish. After hanging out in the hallway a bit, Orden takes Stark to the yard where they find Mutt, the second son, training. Stark senses sibling rivalry brewing but keeps quiet and gets to training. Just before he starts, he asks Orden what he thinks of Mutt. Orden says the kid might not be as talented as his older brother, but he works hard, which is what counts most of the time. Stark tells him to make sure Mutt hears this a lot, and Orden says he already does that, maybe so much that it's getting to the kid's head. Stark chuckles and keeps training. In the next scene, Orden calls Fern and tells her to get ready for her etiquette training so she can attend the soiree with Stark. She can't say no, so Fern dives into her training, which lasts about a month before the event finally rolls around. At the soiree, Fern vents about the stress she went through, and Stark tells her not to underestimate him again. After they both apologize, Stark takes her hands and leads her to the dance floor to show off some of his moves. They dance beautifully, catching everyone's attention. Meanwhile, Frieren is just chilling, munching on cake and enjoying the night. Once the soiree wraps up, Stark meets up with Orden one last time to get paid. Orden thanks him for a job well done and jokingly suggests adopting Stark to replace his son. Stark, however, tells him that's not possible. Then, Orden shares a few thoughts about Stark's hometown and reflects on the day he found Stark in the woods, before mentioning how he treated his son the last time they met. Stark also shares some stories about moments he was disrespectful to his master, and the two connect over their lost family members. A few days later, Frieren struggles to pick out a new grimoire to take with her. While she's dealing with that, Stark and Sign finally chat about their experiences, celebrating the nobleman and his new new heir. Before the main story rolls on, we hit a flashback showing Sign the Priest way back when he was a young buck. On this day, his adventure-loving buddy, who was also way younger, found him chillin' by a fishing spot and dragged him back to the village just to snap a pic with the mage who often swung by. Back then, Sign was just following his pal without a care in the world and got that photo taken. Fast forward over 10 years to now, and we see Sign sitting by the campfire, staring at that same photo he took ages ago. This time, it's in a pendant. After a trip down memory lane, Sign's lost in thought, worried sick about where his buddy could be. The next day, they pack up and trek to the Claw region in the northern lands. Along the way, Frieren talks about one of her longtime friends with the gang. She mentions Old Man Vol, and that she wants to catch up with him before he kicks the bucket. Stark thinks her comment is kinda rude, but Fern is a bit glad Frieren still has folks she can reconnect with. Turns out, dwarves live for about 300 to 400 years, so there's a good chance the old guy is still kicking. Frieren walks with pride and happiness, hopeful to meet the old man still waiting for her visit. After a bit more traveling, they roll into Old Man Vol's village. There, they spot him sitting at the entrance. Frieren does her best to jog the dude's memory so he remembers who she is. Unfortunately, he's pretty out of it, so he's not super responsive. Stark underestimates the old man and calls him senile. To teach Stark a lesson, the old man gives him a solid whack on the shin, leaving him lying on the ground, crying like a baby. The old man then grumbles about warriors being careless while welcoming Frieren to the village. After the small talk, Frieren takes Fern and Sign into the village, leaving Stark to train with the old man while they're around. Soon after, Frieren asks for some work since she plans to stick around for a decade. Fern warns her not to waste any time since they only have a week. Frieren agrees and continues chatting with the old man while Sign and Fern help out on the farm. After a solid day's work, the farmer thanks them and shares some history about Old Man Vol. He says Vol has always been the village's protector for as long as anyone can remember, and even Vol himself doesn't know why he's so protective. Now that he has a friend to talk to, the farmer is happy for the old man. Over the next few days, life continues with Stark struggling through training and Frieren having a blast catching up with her old friend. One night, while wandering through a field of glowing plants, Frieren checks in on Stark's progress, and the old man says he's hanging in there. They move on, and she thanks him for helping her get to know Himmel and the others. In another flashback, Himmel and the gang thank the old man for helping them out with a task. As their convo drifts, the old man talks about his late wife and how much she loved the village he's always known. His last promise to her is probably what's keeping him tied to the village. He tries to downplay it, saying he's too old to even remember his wife's face, but Himmel and the others praise him for keeping a promise to someone he cared about. At that moment, the old man calls Himmel a great hero and gives him his blessing, promising to hold on to that memory for the future. Himmel laughs and tells the old man they already have Frieren, who's probably gonna live for thousands more years, to remember it all for them. Old Man Vol smiles, praising Himmel for having great friends. After recalling a sweet memory, Old Man Vol asks Frieren if she still remembers Himmel's face. Frieren gets a bit put off and tells him that she remembers Himmel, as well as Heider and Eisen, since they were the ones who made her want to connect with others. The old man praises her for that and shares that even though he can't remember his wife's face anymore, he still feels the need to protect the village. Frieren chuckles and calls him a jokester. As time ticks by, the old man asks Frieren where she's headed, and she tells him that they're going to Oriol, the land where souls hang out near Ende and the demon castle. Not knowing the demon king's already been taken down, the old man gives Frieren his blessing. She almost tells him the truth, but decides against it, promising instead to carry his memory far into the future. As they wrap up their meaningful last meeting, the old man thanks her for visiting him in his final moments. The next day, Frieren and the gang pack up and leave the village. As they head out, the old man calls after her, saying he dreamt about his wife the night before. Frieren smiles and keeps on going. After traveling for a few more days, they reach a settlement on Roar Road, still in the 29th year since Himmel's death. They wait for Sign to finish asking the locals some questions. Once he's done, they continue heading north. Stark asks Sign what he was asking the locals earlier, and Sign asks Stark if he remembers why he joined this trip. When Stark says he doesn't, Sign pulls out a photo from his pendant and reminds them of why he's with them. He was checking if anyone had seen someone who fits his friend's description. With the answer being no, he tells his buddies to keep moving north until they run into the loser. Stark asks what the loser's name is, and Sign says it's Gorilla Warrior, a name that's hard to forget. Not stopping there, Sign reveals his own nickname, Goatee Priest, which makes the others think he's a bit odd. Moving on, they reach the canyon connecting the old village to Oberst. If they keep walking for the next week, they'll hit the big city in no time. But first, Sign wants to take a detour to check out a village near that canyon to ask about his friend. Since everyone else wants to rest too, they agree with his plan. Soon, they arrive at the village where Sign asks the first person he sees about Gorilla Warrior. Surprisingly, the guy knows him and directs Sign to a stubborn old woman living on a plateau just a few steps away. They ask the old woman about Gorilla Warrior, but she makes them do a few chores before sharing sharing any info. For the first task, she gives Frieren and the others a letter to deliver to Nagel, a blacksmith in the next town. With no choice, the four of them take the letter and head to the next town. Along the way, Frieren shares some stories about how Himmel did things back in the day. Before long, they reach the town and deliver the letter. When they get back to the village, they keep doing some odd jobs for the old lady, which sometimes means fighting off monsters. For their final task, the old woman gives Sign a bucket of polish and tells the group to follow her into the woods to find the statues she wants them to shine up. The four of them trail after the cranky old lady and chat about the heroes whose statues have been forgotten out there in the trees. Eventually, they reach the spot, and Frieren has a hard time remembering who the statue represents. After looking closely, Stark figures out that the guy on the far right is Kraft, the elf they encountered during that brutal winter. The dude on the left, though? No clue. Standing in front of those statues jogs Sign's memory, bringing him back to when Hyder first brought him and his friend, Gorilla Warrior, who was a buddy back then. Hyder had just warned them how easy it is for past heroes to be forgotten, and to make sure nobody forgets his name, his friend picked the nickname Gorilla Warrior, while Hyder called Sign Goatee Priest. Snapping back to the present, the stubborn old lady finally chimes in, telling him how much his friend used to talk about him and their dreams of becoming heroes together. By the end of the day, Sign heads out of the village feeling a bit down, since he's learned his buddy is in Tur, a trading city across from the big city they're heading to. Now Sign's left scratching his head about what to do, as he doesn't want to leave his new crew just yet. Unable to make a decision, Sign kicks back and thinks about his next words pretty wisely. Time runs out, and with the sun setting, Stark heads back to the village and grabs one of the cabins for everyone to chill in and wait to continue traveling with or without Sane the next morning. That night, Sign and Fern go out to gather firewood and ingredients, respectively. When they return, they notice Fern's hands are freezing. Frieren and Stark check them out, surprised at how cold they are. Fern playfully puts her cold hands on Stark's cheeks, embarrassing him a bit. After that moment passes, Frieren and Fern realize that winter's officially here. Instead of freaking out about it, Frieren stays chill and tells Fern they can still travel in the snow as long as there aren't any blizzards. The very next morning, a heavy blizzard hits, and the village chief warns them not to go out into the wild winds because they could get stuck in the snowstorm for a month. To keep them warm and alive, he gives them extra access to the cabin for the next month so they can rest up. Frieren is super excited, especially when she finds out there's a magic shop run by a quirky old dude in the village. That means she can explore legendary spells and chase her dreams. She talks about some spells she's picked up over time and tells everyone to head back inside and enjoy the rest of the month in peace. Over the next few weeks, everyone carries on with life as usual, with Fern and Stark growing closer each day, and Sign hanging out in the taverns, drinking away. Almost a month later, Sign is chilling in the tavern when Frieren shows up out of nowhere and asks him to come back to the cabin to settle a silly fight between Stark and Fern. Sign rolls his eyes at the drama and heads back to see Stark, who is in tears. To sort things out faster, Sign pulls Stark into a separate room to chat. Stark tells him Fern is mad because he touched her cheeks with his bare hands. Sign scoffs, breaking it down for Stark about how to handle women. After giving him a quick lesson on treating ladies right, he tells poor Stark to go apologize to Fern. Stark promises he will, then leaves the room, letting Fern come in for her turn. Sign tells her she crossed a line by shouting at Stark. Fern owns up to it, but explains she only reacted that way because Stark was too rough with her. He grabbed her shoulder with those strong warrior hands, which freaked her out a bit. Sign asks if she likes Stark, and she admits she does. So, he tells her to go back and apologize for being a jerk. Not long after, Fern and Stark make up and are cool with each other again. In the next scene, Sign is seen drinking and getting annoyed while Frieren sits across from him, totally ignoring his fuss. She thanks him for sorting out the fight between Stark and Fern. Sign chuckles and asks why she pushed him to travel with them in the first place. Frieren smiles and explains it's because she wanted to give him a reason to live, just like Himmel did for her when they first met. Then she asks if he regrets joining their journey, and Sign says not at all. After yet another drinking session, Sign steps outside for a smoke and to think things over. He reflects on the memories he's made with Frieren's crew, and compares them to the fun times he had with his buddy back in the day. This helps him figure out what he wants to do, so the next morning, Sign wakes up early and gets ready to move. When it's time to decide, Sign finally chooses to go find his buddy in Tur. He says goodbye to his new friends, promising to reunite with them at least once before he kicks the bucket. As the hopeful young priest fades into the horizon, he reminisces about the memories he's made with Frieren's group, but soon finds himself bored traveling solo. A few days after the split, Frieren and her buddies make it to the Offen mountain range up north and set up camp in a little cave. One morning, Stark wakes up early to grab some ingredients for breakfast. When he gets back, he sees the ladies still snoozing and cooks up some breakfast before waking them. After calling their names a couple of times, Stark senses something's off. He checks on Fern and finds out she's got a fever. Luckily, Stark wakes her up to let her know about Fern's fever. Realizing her favorite mage is sick, Frieren digs through her bag until she finds the pamphlet Sign left them before they parted ways and looks for herbs to treat the fever. Stark throws in some random questions about the Holy Scripture being the only book for checking illnesses, and Frieren pulls it out from under their breakfast pot. She uses the magic in the book to figure out Fern's illness and thankfully discovers it's just a fever. To grab some herbs, Frieren takes Stark to a nearby settlement, with Stark carrying Fern the whole way. When they arrive, they see a woman milking cows and ask her if their friend can stay somewhere to recover. The woman happily offers them her bed to crash in, and they settle down. After settling in, Frieren asks her about the cherry blossom icicle tree, and the woman says it's north of the place. Frieren thanks her and holds Fern's hands once the woman leaves. Stark wonders why she keeps holding Fern's hands, and Frieren says it helps calm her down and heal quicker. Fern, who's awake, feels embarrassed and calls Frieren out for treating her like a kid in front of Stark. Frieren apologizes and heads out with Stark to pick the cherry blossoms. On their way, Frieren complains about Fern growing up too fast, but quickly pushes that aside so they can get the herbs. Over the next few hours, they hike a long way to reach the tree. At some point, Stark asks if that tree is the last thing they need, and Frieren says they just need the mushrooms growing at the tree's base. They finally find the beautiful cherry tree. Before picking the herbs, Stark asks Frieren again why she was holding Fern's hands. Frieren replies that it's the only way she knows to help with Fern's pain. She then asks Stark what he thinks she should have done, and he says she did the right thing. This sparks a memory in Frieren of Himmel caring for a sick her. Once she's back in the moment, she and Stark chat for a few seconds before they start gathering the white mushrooms. When they return to camp, Frieren makes a soup with the herbs and serves it to Fern the next morning. While she's at it, Stark helps the woman milk the cows, and Fern has her soup. A few days later, Fern makes a full recovery and thanks her 2 travel buddies and the woman who took her in for the help. Once they pack their stuff, they hit the road to Oberst, the magical city. Weeks later, they finally spot the big magical city on the horizon. They still have a few miles to go, but Frieren and her crew can chill out now that they're a lot closer to Oriole. As they head down the hills to catch a carriage, the trio chats about the mage exams. Fern asks Frieren to go for the first-class mage certification in her place since she doesn't think she's strong enough to tackle that challenge. Frieren responds that she doesn't expect to use the certification for long, since she doesn't want to keep coming back to the holy city every 50 years just to renew it. Stark gets curious and asks the 2 mages why they need such a powerful mage to cross the northern plateau. Frieren explains that they need someone tough to protect them because there are some freaky monsters up there. Once they hop into the carriage, the conversation rolls on until Frieren gets offended when Fern calls her an old mage. She eventually goes quiet and dozes off on Fern's lap. Then she wakes up and starts giving Fern some friendly mage advice, leaving Stark a bit surprised and confused. When she wraps it up, she shares how many times she's lost to creatures with less mana just to back up her point. After hearing all that, the 2 go quiet. Miles away, at the edge of Grafgranat's domain, a strange-looking mage is complaining about the long trek to Oberst. Knowing she's being followed, she plays it cool and waits for them to show up. When they do, they threaten to take her out if she doesn't hand over her staff. Before she can do anything, Kraft, the elf from earlier, steps in and chases them off. After saving her from the dangerous mages, Kraft introduces himself to Ubel, the bored mage nearby. Once they start talking, Kraft catches on to her bloodlust and decides not to get involved. He tells her he knows about her earlier kills and would rather not mess with other people's drama. Ubel gets tired of the old guy and continues on her way to Oberst. When Kraft realizes she's headed there for the exam, he remembers Frieren and wishes her good luck. In the next scene, Frieren and her crew visit the Continental Magic Association in Oberst to get the scoop on the first-class mage test. The receptionist goes through the requirements, and Frieren takes off right after hearing them, wishing Fern good luck. Fern quickly holds her back, begging her not to bail just yet. Frieren pulls out her holy emblem and asks if that would do the trick. An old man notices the emblem and calls Frieren back to take a closer look. Once he sees it's the real deal, he tells Frieren to go ahead and take the first-class mage exam, even though she's not technically certified. That evening, Frieren and Fern talk about the power of the holy emblems. Along the way, Frieren shares that even 80 years ago, her pals, Himmel, and the others couldn't grasp the significance of that necklace. Still, Fern and Stark remind her that she's an amazing mage. The next day, the trio hits the big library to study up for the upcoming exam. There, they find out there are currently 2,000 registered mages across the continent, but only 45 are first class. Plus, the upcoming exam only happens once every 3 years, and usually, almost no one passes because the risks are super high and the challenges are tough. Plus, there's not much need for mages in this peaceful age, so hardly anyone goes all out to earn such a prestigious title. For now, Frieren suggests she and Fern train as hard as they can for the next 2 months to get ready for the exam, and that's exactly what they do for the next 2 months. On the first day of the exam, the main proctor, Mage Genau, gathers all the examinees and lays down some instructions before kicking off the first task. 2 other proctors chill in the corner, checking out the magical skills of the most powerful mages they could find in the crowd. After dropping a few big names, including Ubel's, they look over at Frieren and shake their heads, thinking she's just some old mage with weak mana. When it's go time, Genau breaks down the rules for the first test. He splits the 57 participants into teams of 3 and explains how they can find each other. Frieren puts on her bracelet and uses her mana to locate her teammates in the crowd. She strolls over, only to discover the 2 clowns are bickering like crazy over who gets to hold the birdcage. After a quick rock, paper, scissors, Lewin, the smarter one, ends up with the cage, while Kanahu's a third-rate mage like Lewin tags along behind Frieren. Once the first test officially starts, the proctor leads them to a grassy field to tackle the challenge. Each team gets a cage to catch a rare bird called still, and they must bring one back the next day. They also have to keep all their teammates with them at all times during the test. If any one of them steps outside the barrier, the whole crew fails instantly. After laying down the rules, the test kicks off. For the first half, Frieren has to keep an eye on the two goofballs fighting over who gets to hold the cage. After some back and forth, Lewin, the smart one, finally grips the cage. Meanwhile, Kan sticks close to Frieren as she leads the way. Frieren starts chatting with the girls and asks if they've heard of the still. When they reply no, she suggests they find a still and observe it for a bit. After a few hours of searching, Kan gets tuckered out and decides to take a break. Lewin opts to go scout for info and will return with something useful. Frieren checks if she trusts her own skills, and Lewin says she does. With that settled, Frieren lets Lewin go and warns her to watch out for anything flying overhead. Kan praises Frieren's leadership and asks what she meant about being cautious of the skies. Just then, Lewin pops back up and takes them to the still she just spotted. When they arrive, Kan and Lewin team up to trap the bird with a magical icicle. Frieren tells them to get ready for whatever comes next, and in a blink, the bird zooms off at full speed. She explains to the girls that catching a fast bird like that means they need to be super observant. As they dry their hair from the sweat, Frieren starts to feel confident in her teammates' abilities. A minute later, they get back to watching the still birds in their area. As night falls, Kan wakes up to find Frieren's sleeping bag empty. She hears a light rain and starts to wonder where the mage is. Eventually, she searches everywhere until she unwittingly stumbles into a monster bird's lair and gets attacked. Before she even knows what's happening, the bird overpowers her and she loses her staff too. Luckily, Frieren shows up just in time to bail her out. After helping her, Frieren asks why Kan leans on someone like Lewin, even though they don't get along. Kan admits she's always been timid and struggles in critical moments. She feels like a pampered kid who never had the guts to do anything tough. That's why she needs someone like Lewin, who's been through the ringer, to snap her out of her whiny tantrums and get things done. Kan then recounts how she learned to fly for the first time, saying Lewin had to literally kick her off a cliff for her to figure it out. Kan praises Lewin a bit and shares her latest discoveries with Frieren, hoping they can use the info for something solid. After their quick meetup by the cliff, Frieren and Kan hit the hay. A few hours later, Frieren watches the girls sleep, and she drifts back into a memory from 80 years ago, with Himmel and the gang. Back then, Himmel was trying to chill Eisen out by pretending he was just as scared. That night, Hyder said something that stuck with Frieren ever since. After reliving that memory, she looks at the girls before getting back to her own business. Meanwhile, Fern and her crew have snagged their still bird, but now they need to gear up for the tough part, keeping their bird safe from anyone trying to snatch it away. Bright and early the next morning, Frieren and the girls wake up to review what they've learned from watching the birds. From what they noticed, it's obvious these birds are super fast and can pick up on mana real quick. They're tough too. Ordinary magic isn't enough to stop them since they'll sense that mana before it even leaves the caster's staff. To top it off, these stillas don't have any mana, meaning they can't be detected by normal mana sensing. These issues are just scratching the surface. If they even find a still, catching one is going to be a major challenge. Frieren then shares a bird-catching spell she picked up a while back and tells Kan that she used it to take down the monster that nearly gobbled her up the night before. Kan thanks her again for the assist, and Lewin wants to know why Frieren didn't use that spell to catch the still as they saw yesterday. Frieren explains that the spell only works within a 50-centimeter range. Since they couldn't get that close before, there was no way it would have worked. At this point, it finally hits Kan and Lewin that they're facing a serious setback. Moving on, Frieren asks the girls to share a bit about their magical powers. Kan kicks things off by revealing the limitations of her water magic. It turns out that this spoiled kid can only control existing water, not just whip it up out of thin air. And since the barrier blocks any rain from getting into their testing area, she's stuck using her magic only where there's plenty of water around. Even then, she has to infuse her mana into that water before she can control it on the fly. If she does that, the still will sense her mana and probably avoid the watering hole. When Frieren hears "stay away," an idea sparks in her mind. After listening to Lewin's not-so-useful ice magic limitations, she lays out her plans and hears the girls' suggestions for a few more minutes before they get to work. During this time, Lewin and Kan still manage to bicker a little before buckling down. Meanwhile, Fern, along with Land and Yubel, is hiding out in a massive dead tree trunk, waiting for the test to start. Even though Yubel is new to this plan, she goes along with the chill vibes from Land. A little later, they realize they're low on water, so they make a beeline for the nearby lake. While on their way, Land can't help but share how pumped he is to get his hands on a bird. Ubel, who's tuning him out, suddenly feels the ground and realizes something's off. They're walking through a dried-up riverbed, and since the barrier keeps water away, the only trusty water source left is the big lake in the test area. Unfortunately, other test takers also need water to live, so they might bump into some of them at the lake. Realizing the risks, Land, usually the quiet one, decides to ditch the water hunt and instead looks for a small pond if they can find one. But before they can go far, their rivals from the 8th party, Sharf, Era, and rival pretty Sharp Magis launch a surprise attack. Fern reacts just in time to block a lethal strike. making a solid first impression on their foes. After some small talk, Warble demands that Yubel hands over the still they've caught. Just as things heat up, a loud boom echoes from the direction of the lake, leaving everyone confused about what's going on. What they didn't know was that Lewin was the one who caused the bang by icing up the whole lakeside. The other test takers around the lake noticed this, and some tried to melt the ice. After covering the lake, Lewin bolted to take on her next task. In the meantime, Denkin, an Imperial second-class mage, was analyzing the situation with his buddies and pointed out that the adventurers from the second party were pretty clever for leaving a big mana imprint on the lake. This would scare off the birds, forcing them to look for spots with low or no mana. While the battle between Fern and the others was going off, Frieren and her crew kept searching for other watering holes to pump their mana into and shrink the number of spots left for the stillies to hang out. On the flip side, Denkin watched the other party members freak out and act all irrational when they should have been chilling out and waiting to figure out Frieren's plan. Instead of joining those clowns, Denkin and his crew Richter and Laufen took a leisurely stroll around the forest to dig deeper into Frieren's plans. At one point, they stumbled upon a whole party of dead folks hanging from the trees. After checking it out, Denkin guessed they got taken out by airborne monsters. He quickly told them to get moving, but Laufen asked if they could at least take the bodies down and give them a proper burial. Denkin shot that down, saying it was a dumb idea, which made Laufen question why the proctors picked such a dangerous spot for the test. Richter jumped in, saying it's because they think anyone who dies in a place like this isn't cut out to be a first-class mage. As they moved on, Denkin bashed the Continental Association of Magic for that kind of ridiculous logic. Richter asked why he hated them so much, and Denkin replied it was because he believed magic was useless if the caster was a selfish jerk who couldn't connect with people. Richter called him weak, and Denkin warned him not to push it. As they kept searching, they found Kan using her mana to infuse a small watering hole nearby. They rushed over to check it out after she left. Denkin noticed Kan mixed only a tiny bit of mana into the water before she took off, and he couldn't figure out why. He knew the Stillas could see the mana, so they'd steer clear of it. After a moment of thinking, he realized Frieren's crew had to be at a watering hole with no mana in it. Instead of wasting time searching for it, he decided to take a break while still scanning for any magical activity. Not long after, Kan showed up at one of the mana-free watering holes and found Frieren there with Lewin. After some chat, Frieren totally shut down all her mana and went still to keep any from leaking out. Once the girls got the signal, they rushed to hide, with Kan grumbling about the rain falling outside the barrier. A few minutes into their little experiment, monsters and animals from all over came to grab some water before continuing their hunt. About an hour later, the first still bird landed on Frieren's shoulder perfect for her spell. Eventually, she caught the bird and caged it before noticing Laufen and Denkin hanging around. Before they could bail, Laufen used her speed spell to quickly snag the birdcage before Frieren could see it. Meanwhile, Sharf and Era faced off against Land and Fern. In Fern's matchup, she just used basic attack and defense spells against Ere, which ticked the angry bird off. Ere called Fern's magic outdated but still felt uneasy every time Fern blocked her attacks. As for Ubel, she was holding her own against Warble. Era praised Warble for his sneaky magic tactics and warned Fern that Ubel might not last long against Warble if he got serious. So, speaking of the devil, the next scene has Ubel going after Warble instead of following Era's plan. Warble holds his ground against a bunch of Ubel's attacks until he steps out of the 5-meter range where she can't hit him. At this point, Warble plays it cool and egg on Ubel to keep coming at him. This just feeds into his gut feeling when Ubel tells him to bring it on if he's brave enough. Next up, Fern's getting ready to unleash a saturation attack spell at Ere, who's looking all smug when she realizes it's just basic attack spells. But Fern keeps her cool, firing off those basic spells as fast as she can until she totally overwhelms Era and blows her away with a huge explosion. Literally a second later, Warble drops his signature spell, Sorganale, to pin Ubel down. Once that spell hits her, Ubel feels her muscles and joints getting locked up, making it harder to move. She rolls her eyes at how annoying the spell is and wonders why the idiot in front of her didn't use it to catch a still. Before she can think too much, Warble jumps in and lays out the limits of his spell. If he so much as blinks away from Ubel, the spell will break and she'll be free. He threatens to take her out if she pulls any funny business, but then Ubel's like, why haven't you done that since this all started? I mean, he could have taken her out from the start, but didn't. Before she gets the answer she's looking for, Warble tells her to hand over the birdcage. Just when she's about to comply, she realizes she doesn't have to do what he says. Out of nowhere, she tosses the birdcage in the air and sneaks an attack while he's distracted. Unfortunately, she only manages to nick his nose, and even Warble's left bummed out. After rattling off some nonsense, he goes in for the kill. Ubel sees him stalling and asks him about his backstory. Warble figures he'll let her kill some time, so he tells her how in the north, it's common for women and kids to be sent off to fight in wars. Before finishing her off, he mentions he's been taking out women and children for as long as he can remember, so he's got no problem with her. After listening to his ramble, Ubel is just waiting for him to get on with it. After an awkward 2-minute silence, she asks him if he's got the guts to actually kill her. When he stays silent, she analyzes the situation and realizes he's hesitating to add another notch to his belt. Warble keeps blabbering to buy her some time, but eventually, his luck runs out and he gets ready to make his final move. Just as he's about to finish her off, Fern pops up and warns him not to touch her teammates. Warble's a bit shocked that the one everyone thought was the weakest actually took down Ere. He wonders if Fern's the one who snatched the bird, and Ubel explains how it all went down. It was pure luck, and poor Poor Warble didn't have any, especially now that Fern claims she's taken Era out. He thinks through his chances for a moment, then decides to move on to check on his teammate. Yubel tries to call him back, but he just tells her to chill and get back to their task. Eventually, everything's cool, and Warble leaves the girls to handle it. Meanwhile, Land is fighting Sharf in a field of flowers, staying calm as he studies his opponent and watches his moves. Sharf, clueless about Land's plan, uses magic to turn flower petals into metal strips and takes a swing at Land with them. After slashing Land's shoulder open, Sharf gets cocky, thinking he's won. But Land just gets up and rattles on for a few seconds, driving Sharf nuts. After a few yaps, Sharf threatens to decapitate Land if he doesn't admit defeat. At that moment, the real Land shows up behind him and knocks him out, clinching the win. Turns out, the Land that was hanging with the girls earlier was just a clone, and Sharf had no clue. A bit further down, Warble finds Era knocked out and wakes her up, joking about how she lost to such a basic move. Era explains that the constant hits were too much for her, and Warble starts worrying about the purple-haired oddball's mana. Eventually, he just shakes it off and decides to look for Sharf, carrying the immobilized Era on his back like a baby. After walking a few more meters, they find Sharf lying in a field of flowers. Warble grumbles as he lifts Sharf up. With about 3 hours left until sunset, he's given up on getting much done, especially now that he's got 2 teammates out of commission. Soon, rain starts pouring outside the barrier, and Warble gets anxious about what's next. He whines a little, prompting Era to tease him for acting all high and mighty when he's really a nice guy at heart. Warble shares that he's fighting the bad guys to keep a promise he made to a little girl 29 years ago. Back then, demons were causing chaos up north, forcing her family to move to Central Lands. On the last day he saw her, he promised to fend off the demons and help her family return home. Even now, he can't remember her face or voice, but he knows he owes her. After hearing this story, Era calls him an idiot, and he takes the title in stride. As they continue on, they accidentally spot a still chilling on a tree branch. Warble goes quiet and uses his bird-catching spell to snag the bird effortlessly. This keeps his team on track while the others are still searching for nothing. Meanwhile, across the testing area, Frieren and her partners are locked in a stare-off with Lofen, while Denkin is spying on them from a tree branch. The moment he sees Frieren's ears, he realizes she's an elf. Lucky for them, Laufen just needs to use her high-speed spell once to grab the birdcage, and then they bounce with it. Just outside the barrier, Proctor Sense shows up to talk to Janao and gives him a hard time for taking out a few people just for the exam's sake. Janao gets up and explains the obvious reason for his test, but when Sense mentions that test takers need luck, he counters that luck is a skill. With sunset approaching, Genao expects some big fight to go down soon. He also thinks Denkin, the powerful Imperial Mage, will definitely win, since he knows how strong that dude can get when pressed. Soon enough, Denkin and Richter arrive to slow down Frieren and her team, trying to buy Laufen some time to escape. Frieren asks Denkin why they didn't use Laufen's high-speed spell to catch the Stilly earlier, and the old man replies that Laufen is still getting the hang of it, and would probably scare off the bird before getting close. The convo then shifts to Frieren and her achievements before she questions why they're being so obvious with their attacks. At that point, Richter steps in and promises to hold off the kids, while Denkin takes on Frieren and hopefully beats her. Denkin warns Richter not to kill the kids, but Richter tries to get him to step up. Eventually, Denkin tells him that becoming a first-class mage isn't worth dying for, so he better be careful. Frieren backs up the old man, calling the title just a title. At this point, Richter is pretty grossed out by Frieren's lack of knowledge. He explains that achieving that title grants access to the great sage and goddess on Earth, Syria, who can supposedly grant any spell they want. Basically, mages can gain wealth and power without any real cost. Sadly, lots of first-class mages just ask for pointless stuff to make themselves look bad. After his quick history lesson, he asks Denkin to hold Frieren down for just a minute so he can take out the kids. Denkin warns him again against killing them, and says he'll punish him if he tries that. Richter finally agrees to tone down his attacks a bit. Then, he uses a spell to separate himself and the girls from Frieren and Denkin, so they can fight fair and square. About 1,000 years ago, Flam and her elf buddy Frieren met Syrie, the only mage rumored to have read every grimoire ever, and can whip up spells like it's nothing. When they meet the legendary sage, Flam and Frieren show their respect, though Frieren is curious about who this lady actually is. Watching his partner bail on him, Denkin complains that these young folks are way too eager and fiery about all this magic privilege stuff. Frieren asks why he's saying that, and he replies that the real joy of magic is all about the search for it. Back in the flashback, Syrie is impressed that Flam went out of her way to pick Frieren, another elf, as her student. After complimenting Flam, Syria asks Frieren to name any spell she wants, and she'll grant it. But hearing this crazy once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Frieren turns it down, echoing what Denkin just said to her. This annoys Syria, and she tells Flam that Frieren is a fool with no ambition, but Flam stands up and tells the greatest mage ever that Frieren is the one who's gonna defeat the Demon King and bring peace. Syria gets even more ticked off and asks Flam if she really believes that. Flam gets in Syria's head and shields Frieren from all the nonsense. Snapping back to the present, Frieren gears up to fight Denkin. Meanwhile, Lewin and Can team up to take on Richter, who uses his earth magic to block everything they throw at him. Once he figures out their tricks, Richter is disappointed that these are the kids he gets to fight. Lewin and Can get annoyed at his snarky comments and try to fire back, but Richter gives them a lecture about basic magic knowledge and the reasons spells come with so many limits. After babbling a lot, he drops to his knees. He warns them not to get any wild ideas or he might be forced to take them out. Lewin pretends Can control water in people's bodies, but Richter sees right through her bluff and tells them their threats don't scare him. In the end, Lewin puts it all together. If he's as invincible as he claims, he should have fought them somewhere with water. She asks him why he's so scared of that, and he tells her to watch her mouth or else. Meanwhile, Frieren and Denkin get into a back-and-forth battle for a few minutes, until Denkin realizes what Frieren's plan is. If he doesn't wrap this up now, who knows what could happen to him. He ramps up the intensity with more complex wind and fire spells, trapping Frieren in a massive fire tornado that even Janao and Sense, outside the barrier, can see. After chatting for a bit, Sense tells Janao she noticed someone checking out the barrier the day before. Janao tells her not to sweat it. That person is just wasting their time because they don't think anyone is stronger than the Great Sage. After summoning the tornado, Denkin unloads a flurry of attacks that Frieren easily blocks and even turns back at him. Realizing he's got no shot at winning, Denkin's hope fades as Frieren swoops in to drain his mana. With him grounded, Frieren threatens to end him if he doesn't reveal where Laufin is. He stays quiet, but Frieren figures out Laufin is just nearby. She calls for the clumsy rookie to show up with their still so she can take it back and let them go. No show, no mercy. She'll kill Denkin. Laufin, sneaking around just a hair away, thinks about zipping in with her high-speed spell, Jilwar, to grab the old dude and zip away with the stille without Frieren catching on. Denkin warns Laufin not to fall for Frieren's bluff, knowing the mage isn't gonna kill him. But Laufin does the crazy thing and gets snagged by Frieren, who ties them up and takes her bird back. After they're tied up to a tree, Laufin asks the old man why he's so set on becoming a top-notch mage. He says it's just so he can enter a certain village to visit the grave of a friend, nothing more. Then, Denkin asks Frieren what her plan is now that Richter knows he's lost. Frieren stays chill and tells Denkin that Lewin and Can are gonna win, so he shouldn't sweat it. Now that she's figured out the barrier, she can finally help the girls take down that arrogant jerk. While Frieren works on breaking the barrier, Richter keeps being a pain for the girls. After almost offing them yet again, Frieren finally casts a spell to smash the barrier. Janao and Sense catch a glimpse of that bright green light from the testing area. Janao realizes who just pulled off that spell and figures out she's the last great mage. From miles away, Syria notices Frieren's magic and welcomes her back in style. After seeing Frieren accomplish the impossible, Denkin asks her why she broke the barrier, and she explains it's to help Can control rainwater and beat Richter down. Meanwhile, Richter notices the barrier's gone and chillaxes while trying to keep fighting. By then, Lewin has him pinned down with ice magic, while Can directs a massive wave of water right at him. All Richter can do is gape at the wall of water as it sweeps him back to where Denkin and Laufin are. Frieren fetches her girls and tells them to keep hiding for a couple more hours until the test wraps. Richter sulks, feeling stupid, but Denkin reminds them they still have a shot. He tells Richter to bust down the tree they're tied to, and he does just that. Moving on, Denkin tells his crew to hang tight because they need to scout out other teams and maybe snag their still. Meanwhile, Lubel gripes to Fern about the basic spells she's always casting, and asks her for other spells in her repertoire. As they chat, Land warns Fern not to show all her cards, since they might be up against each other in the next test. Elsewhere, Denkin and his crew stumble upon a defeated team that lost a member but is still holding on to their still. After mulling over a few ideas for them, Denkin finally shows up. With almost no mana left, he approaches them with a killer vibe and decides to settle things with a fist fight. Once the rain stops, the other teams chill out and wait for the test to wrap up. In the end, only 18 out of 57 made it through. After a quick rundown of the next test, set to kick off in 3 days, Janao sends them off. Later that night, Stark kicks back at the bar, relaxing without the girls. The next evening, Stark wakes up to a knock on the door. At first, it's a light knock, so he doesn't think much of it, but then it turns into a pounding, and he gets dressed to see who the hell it is. When he opens the door, he finds Fern and Frieren waiting for him, and he asks if the first test is over. Fern tells him it's done, and that they've been around since last night. Stark feels a bit down because he already knows what's coming. Fern asks if he was up all night, and he admits he was. She then inquires if he's been sleeping this whole time, and Stark just keeps digging his own grave. Eventually, Fern gets super annoyed with both Frieren and Stark for snoozing in and wasting her time. To make it up to her, they have to spend the rest of the day trying to cheer Fern up. They head out and hit the streets until Frieren finally decides to take Fern to this nice restaurant she used to go to with Himmel and the others 80 years ago. Stark asks if she can afford it since it's a bit pricey, but Frieren shrugs it off and says it's no big deal. Not far away, Richter is fixing a magic lamp for an old lady in what seems like his magic shop. Once the lamp is good to go, the lady thanks him and gives him some sugar as a reward. Richter realizes what he just got and yells at the old woman, telling her not to treat him like a kid. He keeps the sugar, but just as he's about to go back inside, Denk and Laufin show up to say hi. Richter knows they're not a team anymore, so he tells tells the old man to leave him alone, but Denkin invites him to grab a bite at this restaurant they've been hunting for. Richter asks Laufen why she's still hanging around the old man, and she says it's because he bought her some donuts. Richter is so annoyed since he just got back to work. Denkin tells him he's being pathetic and to live a little, it won't kill him. Hearing that, Richter tells the guy to let him be and go eat wherever he wants. But Denkin tells Richter he used to visit that same restaurant with his wife when she was alive. This makes Richter change his mind, and he agrees to join them. Meanwhile, Land is wandering through a dark, empty alley in the city and stops to watch a mother cat and her kitten reunite after being apart for days. Soon, Ubel shows up and joins him on his walk. After some small chat, Land asks Ubel why she didn't just kill Wurble on a whim during their fight, considering she's usually quick to pull the trigger. Ubel says it's a tough one to explain, but after some quick recollection, she says it's because she feels for him. Before long, she pins Land down with Wurble's Sorganale spell and explains how it works. Turns out, Ubel has this weird ability to use the signature spells of people she connects with, which is why she didn't kill Wurble. After that, she tries half-heartedly to get Land to share his backstory so she can sympathize with him and learn to make perfect copies of herself. Land sees through her annoying attempts to get under his skin and tells her she's being dumb for using people's magic without getting the concepts. In the end, he makes it clear that she's not getting anything from him, so if she wants to kill him, she should just go ahead. Ubel changes her mind and lets Land go, but this time she's determined to follow him until he gives in. As night falls, Denkin and his crew finally spot the restaurant they've been hunting for. Denkin recognizes it as the place he used to hang out at with his late wife and steps in after chatting for a few more seconds. Inside, they find Frieren and her friends checking out the menu and decide to just enjoy their meals without any stress. When their food arrives, Stark gets Omurus while Frieren and Fern go all out with piles of meat and desserts. While they dig in, Frieren reminisces about the last time she visited such a restaurant with her old friends. Back then, the food was so good that the head chef was called over to receive thanks from the heroes. Frieren fills her plate, thinking she might never taste such amazing flavors again. The head chef assures her that the restaurant will be around for the next 200 years, serving up the same great flavors. Fern and Stark are thrilled to try such a delicacy in their lives and ask Frieren if anyone deserves to be this happy. At that moment, Ubel and Land are seen dining at the same place like nothing's amiss. After they finish eating, Frieren and her crew leave the restaurant and head home. The next morning, Stark is out meditating on the town's outskirts when an old man suddenly pops up and starts giving him life advice. Soon, Frieren arrives and asks Stark who the old man is. Stark admits he doesn't know because the guy shows up only when he's training. They move past that, and Frieren invites Stark to help calm down Fern since she's upset with her again. When Stark asks what went down this time, Frieren explains that it was her turn to shop that morning, but she overslept and missed the good sales. Now, Fern is super mad and won't even look at her. Frieren pleads with Stark to mediate and smooth things over with Fern. Stark gathers some courage to ask Fern how to make things right, and she tells him to get her some snacks, complaining that Fern has been acting bratty lately. With no other option, Stark takes Frieren to the snack store to grab some goodies for Fern. Meanwhile, Can watches Wurble and Sharf from a balcony as they mess with some random guy and wonders what's up. Thankfully, nothing crazy happens when Leween shows up dressed like a spoiled noble. Can calls her cute, and Leween explains it's because her clueless brothers keep buying her stuff she doesn't need. Can goes all out to treat Leween like true nobility, which only makes Leween yank Can's hair. Next, we see Stark and Frieren at the snack store waiting for Fern to pick something. Stark urges her to hurry, and Fern tells him he should choose for her. A few minutes later, Leween and Can arrive, and are happy to see Frieren there. After picking snacks for their angry friend, the five of them head back to the inn, and Stark gets to know them better. Just when he thinks his day can't get any worse, Wurble and Sharf show up checking Stark out. Once they see he has all the traits they want, they recruit him as their frontliner to tackle a fresser destroying crops. Wurble asks Fern for permission, and she gives it right away. With that, Wurble pulls Stark along, and the girls head back to the inn. There, the two girls give Fern a box of snacks to thank her for helping them make it to the second test. Frieren remembers a moment with Himmel when he helped a random girl, teaching him something important. Himmel told her to change someone's life so she'd be remembered as a hero too. Over the next few hours, she enjoys her time with the girls and finally makes Fern smile again. Just then, Leween reminds Frieren how long it took her to wake up on the second day. Frieren begs her to zip it, but a messenger bird arrives with a notice about the next test. Unfortunately for them, the proctor for the next test is Sense, and if they've learned anything about Sense, it's that her tests are incredibly tough. Around that time, the others get the notification about the next test. After checking out the difficulty of her test, Janao scolds her for making it so hard, but Sense reassures him that it doesn't involve killing the participants. The next day, all the folks taking the second test gathered at the entrance of the King's Tomb ruins up north to get the scoop on what they had to do next. When Sense, the proctor, finally showed up, she called for everyone's attention and welcomed them to the test site. After clearing up some of the wild rumors about how dangerous her test was, Sense explained what they needed to do. They were supposed to raid the tomb ruins behind her and make it to the bottom of the dungeon while dodging traps and obstacles. If they could pull that off, they'd pass the test. Before she could keep going, one of the bald guys in the group asked if she was planning to make everyone fail like she did last time, since that's what she's known for. Sense got a little annoyed with the dude and reminded him that first-class mages are the ones who make the impossible happen, so he shouldn't expect to be babied through it. Just then, another contestant asked how they'd prove they made it to the bottom. Sense said she'd be following a group of her choice down there, but would try not to step in their way. When she got down, she'd announce who passed based on what she saw. She also handed out special golem bottles to everyone to keep them safe. If anyone found themselves in a tight spot, they could smash the bottle to call the golem to take them back to the entrance. But if they did that, they'd automatically fail the test no pressure, right? Once she wrapped that up, she mentioned the bottles would break at dawn the next day, ending the test. Then she dismissed everyone and the test kicked off. For the first hour, nobody entered the dungeon. Everyone was too busy chatting about strategies. Denkin kept his friendships with Richter and Laufen going and tried to rally everyone to team up to tackle the dungeon together. As usual, there's always that one jerk who ruins the vibe, and an airhead spoke up to shoot down Denkin's idea. After spewing nonsense for a few minutes, the idiot headed into the dungeon solo. Soon after, people started entering in pairs and threes. A little later, Frieren and Fern geared up to start their second test. Fern asked Frieren why she didn't just join another team. Frieren pointed out that it was too late for that kind of teamwork now. When Sense spotted Frieren, she decided to stick with her team. As time went on, Frieren and Fern focused on mapping out the dungeon by checking things out before heading down further. After helping Sense avoid a trap, they chatted about Himmel's love for dungeons. That moment hit Frieren with a wave of boring memories with Himmel during their dungeon runs. Once she finished reminiscing about the wise words of the so-called hero, Frieren asked Fern what she thought about it. Fern only sighed and continued on in silence. A few hours later, Denkin and his crew saw the last group, Laween and Kan, head into the dungeon. With just 5 of them left, Denkin decided to make the most of it to pass the test. When he complained about everyone's stupidity for not cooperating, Richter gave him a different perspective. In the end, the old guy stood up and got serious about the test. Moments later, Frieren stumbled upon a weird treasure box and got super hyped, thinking there was a rare grimoire inside. Knowing the box was a mimic, Fern tried to warn her, but hard-headed Frieren wouldn't listen. Instead, she stuck her head inside the box and got stuck in the mimic's teeth. A minute later, reality hit her as she started screaming for help. Fern tried to pull her out of the mimic box, while Sense, who had been watching the whole thing, regretted ever having high hopes for them. In the next scene, Denkin and his crew are cruising through the dungeons like it's a piece of cake. After dodging a couple of traps, they finally hit a tricky floor. Just when they're about to bust open the door to the next level, the gargoyle statues standing guard spring to life and go on the attack. Denkin and his crew fight back, managing to dodge and take down a few of those wild gargoyles. But sadly, one of them gets caught in the chaos and gets flung into a room with crushing spikes on either side. As the door slams shut, the spikes start closing in on her. Once Denkin finishes off the gargoyles, he tries to knock down the door, but it's a no-go. In a pinch, he tells the girl to break her golem bottle, and she does just that. In no time, the golem breaks through the trapped room door and carries her back to safety. Meanwhile, Fern gets fed up with dragging Frieren along and thinks it's time for a different tactic. This time, she shoves Frieren into a treasure box, which chokes and spits her out. While Fern fixes her hair, Frieren shares some thoughts from her past experience in there. After they tidy up, they keep heading down to the bottom of the dungeon. On their way, they run into some gargoyles and take them out before moving on to the next level. When they're almost at the bottom, Frieren takes a breather to check out the magical junk she's collected so far during their journey. While they're chilling, Sense asks Fern to help her get to know her better. Despite being the youngest third-class mage in history, Sense can't pick up any passion or drive from Fern and is puzzled. Fern sighs and explains that she only became a mage to keep her promise to Hyder, but now that she's here, she's lost her motivation. Sense asks what inspires her, and Fern admits she's still doing this just to make Frieren happy. Hearing their heartfelt chat makes Sense really happy to be tagging along with them. Elsewhere, Werble and his crew find themselves in a sketchy spot in the dungeon, sensing the tension in the air. Before they can figure out what's happening, someone uses Sorganale on Era and attacks the remaining two. Werble blocks the blow and tells Sharf to obscure the enemy's view. Once they do that, the enemies finally reveal themselves. Turns out, they're perfect replicas of the 3 of them, and this finally clicks for Werble as to why nobody ever passed the second test. At the same time, Denkin's crew faces the same enemy, but they quickly outsmart and take them out before anyone can get hurt. Afterward, Denkin studies the magical replicas and explains to everyone that these fakes are a serious threat. At least the upside is that the fakes are a bit easy to spot compared to the originals, but they still have some tough challenges to deal with. They keep chatting for a bit until they finally get up and head to the boss's room. What they uncover behind that door is something they totally didn't expect: Frieren's replica waiting for them. If they apply everything they've learned so far, they're gonna realize how strong Frieren's replica really is. Denkin gets his crew ready for what's next so they don't get blindsided. In the next scene, Janao is hanging out with his partner in their office, chatting about the Lord lord of the dungeon, also known as Spiegel, the water mirror fiend. Janao explains that Spiegel is a monster from some old school legends and shows up in Ewig, the sage's epic tales. Right now, they think Spiegel can read the memories of anyone who steps into the dungeon and then creates perfect clones of them. Nowadays, Ainsam is the only other monster that's kinda similar to Spiegel. After a bit, Janao's partner wonders why Sense chose this spot for her test. Janao says it's because she knows that beating yourself takes some chill and cool-headed thinking, which is totally up Sense's alley. Lucky for everyone, she's got safety measures in place to keep things from going too far south. Next up, Denkin and his crew bolt out of the boss room when the Frieren replica starts coming after them. Once they're outside, they start brainstorming their way out of this new mess. Meanwhile, Land and Yubel are stuck together, facing a dead end. Turns out, Land got hit by a clone version of Yubel and is really hurt from the attack. Yubel, not really fussed about his injuries, asks him how to tell if her clone is as flawless as it looks. While she's at it, she spots her clone chilling down the hall after turning a corner. Before she can respond, Land drops some truth bombs about her and implies how not so perfect the clone is. Once Yubel gets what he's saying, he breaks down the clone's attack patterns, also mentioning that the clone thinks just like her. At the end of their chat, Yubel sees the blood pooling under Land's wound, but before feeling bad for him, she asks if he's the real deal or just another clone. Land stays all cool and aloof, so Yubel tries to lend a hand by making him use her golem bottle to avoid kicking the bucket. Land declines, trying to get through to her, when Yubel suddenly goes after her clone and fights to get Land's bottle back. During the first half of her battle with herself, Yubel holds her own, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When that moment hits, she lets her replica pin her down with Sorganale. Then, when the real Land shows up, the clone gets distracted by him. Yubel jumps on the chance to slice the fake in half and claims victory. After the brawl, she moves closer to the injured Land, a bit stunned to find out it was just a clone all along. The real Land shows up and asks Yubel why she fought so hard for the bottle, even though she knew that version of him was a clone. Land thought Yubel was just being nice, but she then lays out her master plan, which annoys Land just a bit. Eventually, Yubel thanks Land for helping her learn more about him, and Land asks if she can finally empathize with him. When she says no, they keep on moving. After going down a few more floors, Frieren randomly stops to check out a hidden room she senses. Fern and Sense are urging her to stop messing around and just finish the test, but Frieren trusts her instincts more than anything. So, she fiddles with the mechanism until she finally gets the door to the hidden room open. Once it's all the way open, the trio steps inside to find the tomb of a special king from the Unified Dynasty era. They take a moment to admire the murals on the walls before moving on. As they go down a few more floors, they finally spot Denkin and his crew hanging out at the entrance to the boss room. Frieren stops to ask why they're just sitting there. Denkin helps her peek through the door, and Frieren sees her replica standing in the middle, waiting for her first challenger. Excited to see herself recreated, Frieren teams up with the guys to figure out her weaknesses. Richter suggests using restraint or hypnosis magic to take her down, but unfortunately, Frieren is resistant to both. However, Denkin remains hopeful, believing that those spells could still create an opening for the real Frieren to strike. To test the magic limits, Denkin has Method try her spells on Frieren. Method uses both restraint and hypnosis magic, only to discover Frieren was right. After checking things out, Method suggests they find a hypnosis expert in their group to work on Frieren. Denkin asks if she knows anyone like that, and she mentions Edel, a non-combat mage who specializes in hypnosis. The downside? Edel is pretty weak, and her magic only works on those with their own minds. Until then, it's unclear if the replicas have minds or not. Denkin sighs, realizing they're lacking a lot of information. In the next scene, Edel and her teammates are hiding from what looks like Sense's replica. After keeping their mana hidden for so long, Edel still feels helpless to save her teammates, Blay and Dunstay, and take on the crazy replica. If anything, she wants to try her hypnosis magic on Ida if it actually has a mind, but if not, she feels pretty useless. So, she checks out the replica standing a few meters away and makes her deductions. Soon after, she tells her team to bail and come back in 3 years, but then Blay asks her to at least try using her hypnosis on the replica. Edel explains that although her family's hypnosis magic isn't top-notch, she can force the replica to kneel and create an opening for them to attack if she can make eye contact and has 15 seconds to cast. Before she even finishes explaining, the crazy replica spots them and strikes first. To buy herself those 15 seconds, Edel instructs her team to set up a barrier to block the replica's attacks while she completes the spell. Blay and Dunstay do what they need to, successfully blocking the attacks for a bit. Unfortunately, the barrier doesn't last long as the replica brings it down before they know it. With the barrier gone, Edel locks eyes with the beast and tells it to kneel. Just then, the replica lunges at her first and pierces her chest. At that moment, Edel finally realizes the replicas don't have minds of their own. She decides it's time to use her escape potion and leaves her crew to team up with others. Soon after, a golem shows up and takes her to the surface. Meanwhile, the rest keep going down as Denkin and his crew decide to use brute force to take down Frieren's replica. With the fight still going between Werble and his replicas, Werble himself gets so into the battle that he easily defeats Era by collapsing the ceiling on her, revealing the other two. Having caught everything Denkin said, Fern steps up to fight the Frieren replica, and the rest instantly agree with her. With that out of the way, Frieren and the gang start brainstorming how to take down her replica. replica. The only crucial info they're missing now is whether the replica can think for itself. Luckily, just before they make any rash moves, a hurt dunce stumbles in to spill what he found out from Adel. The crew spots him right away and rushes to help. Before they patch him up, they ask about his teammates, Edel and Blay. Dunstay tells them Edel had to bail using her bottle, while Blay stayed behind to hold off Sense's replica so he could escape. After hearing this, Dunstay lets them know he's got some intel that could really help, but he needs to be sure they won't stab him in the back. Denkin promises him he can trust them, and gets Methode to take care of his wounds before kicking off their strategy session. Once Methode stops the bleeding, Dunst drops the big news. The replicas can only pretend to have a real mind, but they don't actually think like one. This little nugget saves the crew a lot of time chasing pointless leads. But Denkin still struggles to figure out what the replicas really are, and even more importantly, who made them. Richter tries to remind him that they don't need the whole backstory as long as they nail down the replicas' weaknesses. Then Lewin and Can show up on the same floor to share whatever knowledge they have about the monster controlling the replicas. Lewin's brother had taken the test before, so she has some solid info on the monster behind the replicas. Richter tries to make her out to be the bad guy for not collaborating from the get-go, but Lewin shoots back that she'd rather count stars than team up with a selfish jerk like him. To make things worse, she calls Richter an old man, which really stings him. Once that's out of the way, Lewin lays out how to beat the replicas for good. She says the Spiegel monster is just behind that door, and if they can take down the Frieren replica in the boss room, they can get to the real monster causing all this chaos. Thankfully, the Spiegel monster is weak, so they shouldn't have any trouble taking it down. Denkin and the others make a note of this helpful info, but Lewin warns them to hurry, as the replicas have this creepy habit of gathering at the dungeon's bottom over time to ambush whoever is around. As the group starts to feel hopeless, Fern chimes in with a few questions to confirm if the replicas share the same weaknesses as the real ones. When Denkin asks her what she's getting at, Fern stands up and tells Frieren to move to a specific wall. Frieren does what she's told, and Fern attacks her for real. Obviously, Frieren blocks the hit, but soon the others catch on to a weakness. It turns out, Frieren stops sensing mana every time she casts a spell, but she was too embarrassed to admit such a rookie mistake. With this realization, Fern and the group dive into planning a foolproof strategy to take down the Frieren replica. During their discussion, Fern sees Frieren smiling and asks why she looks so happy. Frieren replies that she was just reminiscing about the old days when she, Himmel, and the others strategized on taking down dungeon bosses and such. After their annoying walk down memory lane, they wrap up their strategy meeting. Not long after, Frieren and Fern give the rest of the team their final thoughts, before heading into the room to take on the Frieren replica, with Frieren reminding everyone to stay sharp and thin out the number of replicas, gathering lower in the dungeon, to avoid getting surrounded. Once they get the green light, Frieren and Fern swing open the door and step into the boss room. After they leave, Denkin gets to work on phase 2 of the plan, leaving Frieren and Fern with the heavy lifting. In the boss room, Fern is trying her hardest to dodge the attacks from the replica of Frieren, sneaking away whenever she can while the real Frieren, who's just as strong and clever as her replica, confronts her. As the fight heats up, both Frieren and her doppelganger unleash some wicked spells, clearly intent on destruction. Even the real Frieren gets reminded of how scary she can be when she actually puts her mind to it. Earlier, she had already shown Fern the kind of spell she needed to take the replica down the Zoltrak spell. When Fern hears she should use it, she starts getting nervous and doubts herself, but a little motivational chat from Frieren helps her snap back to reality. Eventually, she gathers enough guts to trust her skills. Just when she's about to go for it, another annoying flashback yanks us away from the action. This flashback takes us back 1,000 years when Flam had just passed away, and Frieren brought her will to Flam's master, Seria. Seria couldn't care less about her student's death and reads the will without much thought, but what she finds inside really ticks her off because she never expected the free-spirited Flam to pull off her goal of getting humans to openly learn magic. Turns out, before she kicked the bucket, Flam convinced the Emperor to allow the open study of magic, and now she wants Seria to take the reins and teach humans. This makes Seria super mad at Flam for not caring about her legacy, but then she admits that Flam's achievements are going to speed up humanity's development massively. She believes that within 1,000 years, humans will be strong enough to take down the Demon King and do some other incredible stuff. With that, Seria tears the paper to shreds, telling Frieren that she's not about to teach magic to just anyone, since that would just waste her time. Frieren steps in, saying Flam predicted this whole scenario. Flam's only goal for sending that letter was to let Seria know she accomplished her dreams. As Frieren is about to head out, Seria stops her and insists they take a walk together. During their stroll, Seria shares some insights about her master before explaining how handy Flam's favorite spell is, which can create a field full of flowers. When Flam was a kid, Seria thought the girl was way too ambitious for dreaming that big. She figured Flam's life was too short to make a real impact, but now she sees what determination and a focused mind can actually create. Then she touches on the concept of time, pointing out how much has passed since humans built their civilization. She thinks all they need is about 1,000 years to reach the elves' level and maybe even go beyond that. To wrap things up, Saria tells Frieren never to give up on her training, as she'll need it every single day. Frieren takes a deep breath, stepping into this new era of mages and human magic. Now that the flashback is done, Fern sends out a Zoltrak spell to finish off the replica of Frieren. Unfortunately for both Fern and Frieren, the replica dodges Fern's Zoltrak spell and counters with an even stronger attack aimed at taking her down. Luckily, the real Frieren steps in to block it. In a pinch, she creates a golem to hold its ground against the replica, keeping it at bay. But the replica doesn't back down, bombarding both Frieren and Fern with powerful spells. At that moment, Frieren realizes they're in a war of attrition. Meanwhile, Richter and Lewin are teamed up as part of Denkin's earlier strategy. Denkin believes they can take out the replicas one by one if they split into 2 or 3 person teams before they all gather. He also gets them to communicate to avoid unnecessary chaos and casualties. So far, his plans are working pretty well, as each team finds it easier to tackle those annoying replicas together rather than alone. However, everyone is still on edge since they haven't encountered the replicas of their strongest mages, Sense, Denkin, and Fern. Before letting their guards down, Denkin warns the group to stay vigilant. Richter takes a moment to roast Sense for making things tougher for them, to which Sense responds that if he sees her as a problem, he doesn't deserve to be a first-class mage. With that, the fight against the replica continues. Lewin and Richter relax a bit after taking down a bunch of replicas, but just when they're at their weakest, Sense's replica pops up out of nowhere and stabs them both in the chest. Richter is shocked by Sense's sneaky moves, but he's not risking his life for some dumb test. He smashes his bottle along with Lewin, and they both get whisked away to safety. Just in time, Denkin sees Richter and Lewin bailing on the test. He curses himself but recognizes that he wouldn't make a difference if he stayed. Soon after, Ubel and Land arrive to check out the creature in front of them. When Ubel realizes whom Denkin is hiding from, she asks if defeating Sense is necessary to pass the dungeon test. Denkin confirms this, so she gears up and explains her plan to Land before rushing out to confront the replica. Ubel is prepared to use Real Sidon, a spell that slices through just about anything she imagines, to take down the wild replica. Land tries to warn her that cutting through defensive spells is risky, but she goes ahead and uses her most powerful slicing spell. Sense quickly recognizes Ubel's mana and explains why she thinks this reckless third-class mage will win the fight. 3 years ago, during a second test overseen by Berg, Ubel did something unbelievable. Berg was a first-class mage with unbreakable defensive mana that protected him from various attacks. While wearing his unmovable cloak, there was almost no chance anyone could get past his defenses. To pass his second test, he dared anyone to break through, and nobody figured it out until it was Ubel's turn. She simply imagined cutting through cloth and used that mindset to slice through Berg's clothes and body like they were nothing, killing him in the process. After the test, Ubel got disqualified, but Sense chatted with her that day just to figure out what was going on in her mind. When she asked Ubel how she beat the impenetrable cloak, Ubel said she just imagined cutting through cloth with scissors. Sense sat there in disbelief, wondering where this kid came from. After Ubel finished talking, Sense started connecting the dots of what Ubel had told her. Eventually, she realized how differently Ubel thought and considered her worthy of becoming a first-class mage. Unfortunately, since Ubel was disqualified, that dream was on hold, but she could always try again in 3 years. Before leaving, Ubel asked Sense about her hair and how she takes care of it. Sense had previously let it slip that she hated her hair so much, she sometimes just wanted to chop it off. Using that knowledge to her advantage, Ubel simply cut off all of the replica's hair, taking it out in the process. Elsewhere, Werbel and his crew finally get to meet Methode, who fills them in on all the info they need. As she chats with them, her mana sensors pick up the results of the fight between Ubel and Sense, so she passes that info along to Werbel and the others too. Werbel pledges his loyalty to the team and asks Methode what they should do next. Methode spots Denkin's replica and tells Werbel and his crew to tackle that one while she deals with Fern's replica. Era gets a bit confused and asks Methode if she's strong enough to handle Fern. Methode reassures her that she has a few tricks up her sleeve, so no need to sweat it. With everything lined up, Werbel and his crew gear up to get to work. Meanwhile, Ubel, Land, and Denkin bump into the replicas they've already beaten before. This hits them that they're stuck in a war of attrition until Frieren takes down the wild monster, making the replicas. In the following scenes, the battle hits its climax with the others, as Methode finally gets to throw down with Fern. Meanwhile, Frieren remembers something she told Fern during their strategy meeting about dropping her guard to create an opening, just so her replica would do the same, giving Fern a bigger opening to attack. Fern tries to warn her how dangerous that could be, but then Frieren tells her not to worry, saying she's got a plan. Keeping that in mind, Fern watches as the two powerful mages go at it, casting some of the most wicked spells ever. When Frieren gives Fern the chance she needs, Fern doesn't waste any time blasting a hole in the replica's chest. But even then, it wasn't enough, as the replica came back strong enough to pin Fern to the wall and really hurt her this time. Thankfully, the replica was a bit distracted and didn't spot the real Frieren coming for her. When it counts, the real Frieren takes out her replica, saves Fern, and heads to the next door to smash Spiegel. Almost right away, the replicas vanish, and the remaining students pass the test. Sense makes sure to give them props for making it this far, letting them know their achievement won't go unnoticed. When Denkin asks about the ladies of the hour, they find Frieren and Fern chilling out in Spiegel's treasure room. The next day, Fern rolls back into the inn and gets into another spat with Frieren. To chill out, she bounces from the inn and spots Stark hanging out out and training on his usual cliffside spot. Stark sees her furious face and is kind of freaked out, but he reluctantly invites her to sit with him. Not long after, he gets the lowdown on what went down between poor Fern and Frieren. Turns out, Fern was fuming because Frieren brushed off her broken staff from the fight with her replica in the king's dungeon. While Fern wants to fix her staff, Frieren thinks she should just snag a new one. Fern isn't about to ditch her old staff since Hyder gave it to her, and Frieren knows that. Stark quickly figures out why Fern is so mad at her master. That staff is her connection to Hyder's memory. Meanwhile, Kan is seen trying to cheer up her buddy Lewin, who's feeling like a failure, when Frieren walks by. Kan and Lewin rush over to say hey, but they're totally shocked to see Frieren holding a bag full of broken wood. Next, Denkin shows up at Richter's magic shop pretending to be a customer, but he has his own agenda. He's checking in on his old teammate. Richter sees right through his little act but keeps it professional. While Denkin browses the magical stuff, he asks Richter why he even bothers to keep his shop open when he's in a bad mood. Richter tells him that regular folks gotta make a living, no matter their mood. After hearing that, Denkin shuts up and just keeps agreeing with everything Richter says about how much he feels like a failure. Eventually, Richter gets fed up, and Denkin calls him a cocky kid who reminds him of his younger self. Even after getting dissed by someone way younger, Denkin still throws out some advice, telling Richter to hang in there and work harder so he can retake the test in 3 years. After that, Denkin takes off with Laufen. Richter just sits there, staring at the ceiling until Frieren strolls in to get Fern's staff repaired. Having already been in a bad mood, Richter checks out the staff and besses it to Frieren before suggesting she just forget about fixing it and get a new one. Frieren, who doesn't get emotions at all, just takes it in and gets ready to leave. But then Richter calls her back and decides to fix the staff while Frieren checks out the magic shop. While he works, Richter apologizes for calling the staff useless and speeds things up to get it fixed that day. Hours later, Stark and Fern head back to the inn after being outside all day. On their way home, they chat about how Frieren is really trying to grasp emotions when they bump into Richter, who recognizes her from the second test. He stops the purple-haired mage and tells her to be careful with her staff so it doesn't break again. At this point, Fern hustles home to find her staff all fixed up and placed on her bed. She remembers something Hyder told her about Frieren trying to understand human feelings and appreciates the effort Frieren made to get through to her. With that, she puts her staff down and hugs her master. The next day, all 12 contestants for the third test show up at the venue to check out the final test that's about to turn them into top-notch mages. Just before the test kicks off, Saria, the legendary sage herself, gathers the exam proctors to give them a stern talking to for letting someone as powerful as Frieren join in and help so many mages breeze through to the last test. She's worried that a bunch of these weaker mages made it this far, not thanks to their skills, but just because of Frieren's support. If any of them take part in the real third test, some could end up biting the dust. To stop that from happening, Saria gets the go-ahead from Lernan, a prodigy, and declares herself the new proctor for the final test. But for this test, Saria promises to keep things chill and pick based on her gut feeling. After that, she lets Lernan chime in, and he tells her he can't compete with Frieren anyway, since he noticed she's been holding back her mana to trick both people and demons. Saria grins at the shy guy and asks the others if they caught that about Frieren too. A lot of them shake their heads, saying they didn't notice anything weird about her mana at all. If she was hiding her power, it seems like she must have spent a lifetime perfecting that tricky skill. Saria smirks, then reveals that Frieren has indeed spent most of her life focusing on hiding her mana to fool both demons and people. Given the time Frieren had to learn different spells, she might seem weak, but she still manages to take out a ton of demons every year. This just shows how fine-tuned Frieren's mana control is. For Lernan to pick up on that means he's got some serious talent. Saria stands up, roasting the old man for being such a wuss until the end. She pretends to regret taking on human students, saying they die way too often. Plus, she just can't stand Lernan's modesty and humility, thinking those traits held him back from facing real challengers in his life. After leaving the meeting, Saria heads over to the interview room, getting ready to interview the contestants. When Frieren learns that Saria will be doing the picking, she immediately realizes that the childish sage is going to mess up because she isn't the mage she wants her to be yet. But honestly, Frieren couldn't care less about what Saria thinks of her. As the test kicks off, the first contestant, Laufen, walks in for her interview. Before Laufen can get too far into the nice room, Saria sees right through her and fails her on the spot. Laufen asks why she did that, and Saria explains her reasons. After failing about 4 more students, she finally gets the chance to interview Frieren. Saria throws Frieren a bone, asking her what her favorite spell is to see if she's real mage material. Frieren says it's a spell to create a field of flowers, which only annoys Saria more, and she fails Frieren immediately. Frieren just brushes it off and heads for the door, but before she gets far, Saria calls her back and questions how she managed to beat the Demon King with such a chill attitude. Frieren mentions she didn't do it alone, then lists the names of the other 3 heroes who helped her, and drifts off into one of her usual annoying flashbacks. In this one, she and Himmel are chatting about why he picked her to be their mage for the mission. Himmel shares the story of how they first met when he was younger and got lost while herb picking in the forest. He was ready to give up on finding his way home when Frieren, the lone elf, appeared and pointed him toward his village. Before letting him go, she created a beautiful field of flowers that totally caught Himmel's attention. Then she tells Saria that she got to meet such amazing people just because she cast that spell for Himmel back then. After that, Frieren leaves, warning Saria to keep an eye out for Fern's awesomeness, but Saria just scoffs at it. When Fern finally walks into the room, Syria isn't a fan at first, but then she gets curious and asks Fern what she can see. Fern becomes the first mage ever to notice the shifts in Syria's mana. Syria instantly falls for Fern and begs her to be her student. Fern turns her down so many times that Syria ends up disappointed. In the end, Fern calls herself Friren's only student and leaves the decision up to Syria. Eventually, Syria passes on Fern and moves on to the next person. Soon, Syria runs into Denkin, who she initially thinks is just some old dude with no drive or ambition. But after analyzing his thought process and guts, she realizes she was totally wrong and decides to pass him on a whim. Next up is Yubel, whom she just passes without saying a word. Yubel is taken aback since she didn't expect such a quick pass. But a win's a win, so she takes the W and bounces. Then comes Land, who shows up with his clones, and Syria gets really annoyed since he's not taking the first class exam seriously. Land tries to play the goof, but Syria calls him out, noting that his real body hasn't even left his hometown since the test started. She even predicts what he'd be doing right at that moment, leaving Land shocked, since even Yubel couldn't figure that out. Still, she appreciates his guts and passes him. Next, she faces Werble and throws a few questions his way to see how he thinks. Once he gives her the answers she wants, she happily passes him and moves on. Methode, the final contestant, also gets a pass because she says all the right things. After the test wraps up, Sari apologizes to Sense for being rude earlier. Contrary to what she thought, most of the contestants actually have what it takes. A few hours later, the ones who didn't make it are sulking, thinking about training for the next 3 years for the next test. As Frieren and Fern head out of the building, Denkin thanks Frieren for helping him earn a title that'll make visiting a certain grave a lot easier. The next day, Stark takes Fern to a snack shop, where she struggles to pick a snack she likes. Once she finally settles on one, Laufen shows up with Denkin, and it turns out they both enjoy the same snacks. To keep things chill, Denkin buys both girls more snacks and sits down to share with them. Stark feels a bit awkward about the whole thing, so he asks Fern who the old man is. When Stark realizes he's an Imperial mage, he freaks out and apologizes for being so casual with him earlier. Denkin brushes it off, then starts talking about his late wife and how he doesn't have grandkids. He mentions he got into magic and power just to cure his wife, but by the time he learned about the Continental Association of Magic, it was too late because she had already passed. He tells Fern he always thought of magic as a way to resolve conflicts, but Frieren reminded him of how fun magic can be. He suggests she thank Frieren, but Fern tells him to do that himself. As for Frieren, she's off somewhere randomly grabbing books from the library to study and strolling down the street when she notices an old lady struggling to keep her merchandise on her stall. Werble pops up to help her out, then criticizes Frieren for ignoring the woman. Frieren flips the script and tells him he looks like a killer. Werble agrees and goes on to share his backstory, saying he got this good by just listening to those boring hero tales about Himmel that everyone told in his village. As a kid, he used to get mad at his friends for sharing those dull stories instead of epic hero tales. But as he grew up and faced more demon attacks, he realized none of those big stories had anything to do with his village, since other folks had their own lives to lead. When Frieren asks what he's getting at, he just says he's there because of all the tales he's heard about Himmel. With that, Werble stands up, feeling like he said something meaningful, and leaves to rejoin his friends. Before disappearing from sight, Werble tells Frieren to enjoy her time with people more because death isn't the only goodbye that exists. Shortly after he takes off, Frieren starts thinking about another memory with the heroes, Himmel and the gang. This time, the goofball Himmel was rambling on about some deep stuff involving guiding sheep and all that. After that annoying memory flashback, she heads back to the inn and finds out Fern scored an invite to the association building to get her first-class mage privileges. Since she can bring guests, Fern decides to take Stark and Frieren with her, but when they arrive, they learn the hard way that Syria has banned Frieren from entering the building for the next 1,000 years. Frieren asks the receptionist what she did to deserve this, but Fern figures Syria is probably mad at Frieren for not following the path she wants her to. So, Frieren and Stark end up waiting outside all evening for Fern to finish her business. Later that night, Frieren tells Stark how proud she is of Fern for reaching that level, and she's happy Fern made it to the top of her mage game. Just then, Lernan shows up and apologizes for Syria. After checking him out, Frieren realizes the old mage spotted her mana fluctuations. She gives him props and calls him a war hero from a peaceful time. Lernan agrees, saying that's how Syria sees him too. He thinks if he hadn't been born in such chill times, he could have been an even stronger mage. Right now, he doesn't want Syria to feel lonely after he's gone, so he plans to take Frieren down just to keep his name alive in his master's memory. Before Frieren can say anything back, he attacks her and hurts her soldiers. But Frieren stays cool and tells him that Syria has shown she cares about the students she's trained and never regretted choosing them. After another memory recap, Frieren bails on the loser to catch up with Fern, who just got her new spell. Shortly after she leaves, Lernan learns something new about his master and sees that she loves him just as much as he loves her. The next day, Stark says goodbye to his new friends at Oberst and joins his buddies to kick off their journey to Ende. As they step out of the city, Frieren figures out Fern's new spell, which makes clothes clean. Frieren gives her props for getting such a handy spell and asks if Syria was ticked off about it being so boring. Fern admits Syria was pretty mad, but they both don't care. Before they get too far, Laween and Can show up to say their goodbyes to their friend Frieren. After a quick farewell, the The trio moves on, and Fern asks Frieren why she didn't say anything special to the girls before leaving. Frieren says it's because she'd feel more awkward if they ran into each other again. As expected, she backs up her claim with another memory flashback from Himmel.